and are convened as of 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I would respectfully ask everybody attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. And thank you for joining us, as has been the case, and we will continue to do. Our official meetings of the RTD board are being held remotely in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. For the immediate future, we will continue to hold our meetings via Zoom, and they will be audio and video recorded. You can visit rtd-denver.com to access all meeting recordings as well as our unofficial meeting minutes. Directors and member of staff, for the sake of the record, if you would like to be acknowledged during tonight's proceedings, I would ask that you please raise your virtual hand and wait for me to call on you before proceeding to speak. Directors and staff participating by phone can raise their virtual hands to indicate they would like to speak by pressing *9. You can toggle your mute settings on the phone using *6. I'll go ahead and call the roll of our committee members now, starting with Director Broom.
Present.
Thank you. Committee Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Thank you. Director Cook.
Here.
Thank you. Director Deschel.
Here.
Thank you. Board First Vice Chair Geisinger.
I'm here.
Thank you. And Board Treasurer Whitmore.
Present.
Present. And I am present. That is 7 directors present, 0 absent. For the sake of the record, I also see Directors Sloan and Williams here. We're now going to move into our public comment section. This is including we received some feedback regarding the paid family medical leave insurance program, or family comments. So specifically, I will open up the floor for any comments, anyone attending to weigh on this matter. This will be to address the committee regarding any topics on this agenda, as well as specifically comments about the paid family medical leave insurance or family consideration, for which we have received some feedback. If you would wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. Staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. Again, if you are using a phone, you can toggle your mute settings with *6. And as always, please do bear in mind that if you participate in this process this evening, you are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, you can submit your comments in writing. If any speaker has any documentation to share that is pertinent to your comments this evening, or reference materials, please submit those to the board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. During this comment period, the committee will not offer any comments or responses. Directors or staff may contact speakers following their comments if they raise matters that lend themselves to follow-up. Speakers should please begin their remarks by stating their names, and each speaker will limit their speech to at most 3 minutes. Thank you. So with that, I will turn to Ms. McManus. Do you see anybody in the queue?
I see no hands raised and 10 attendees.
Okay. Well, seeing no hands raised, we won't be receiving public comments. However, we did receive 3 email comments this evening regarding the family program. Those were received from Sandy Granger, Christopher Harmon, and Rachel Nelson. We thank you for submitting your comments. We will not be reading those comments this evening, but they will be included with the official record of this meeting. Seeing no other attendees in the queue or speakers, we will close out the public comment period. There are no information from external entities this evening, so we're going to move right into recommended actions. Let's get to it. We've got another busy night here. So we've got 6 recommended actions. We'll go to our first recommended action. This is for the Audit Committee Charter. This is for the Board of Directors to adopt the Audit Committee Charter. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
I have the mover as Director Catlin, the second as Director Whitmore. And with that, I would like to ask Mr. Doug McLeod, Chief Financial Officer, who's been acting as liaison here, to jump in for the presentation, as well as we are joined by Dave Horonik from Reuben Brown, who I believe will also be presenting the items. So I'll start, Mr. McLeod, with you, and feel free to hand off to Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening. As the chair mentioned, we are seeking the Finance and Planning Committee approval of the audit charter. A lot of work has gone into this. I'd like to thank Directors Deschel, Catlin, and Davidson for all their work on the ad hoc committee. We're finally coming to an end here of the startup of the internal audit function. This is just one of those documents that we need to get in place that really sets the parameters for the function of the audit committee itself. You may recall that we did bring this item as a discussion item on September 13th to this committee, and also to the full board on September 28th to gather feedback. We have incorporated that feedback after discussing with the ad hoc committee members what the implications of that were, and incorporating those in the charter itself. We do have two additional modifications which were not included in this copy, which will show up after this evening, assuming approval to move to the full board for consideration. Very minor modifications. Those were after legal review. There's just two references in there to the Colorado Open Meetings Law with the updated attachment tomorrow. This item has no financial impact, and if the charter is approved, we would come back to the full board in November with the recommendations for the audit committee members. So at this point, Dave, could you give a quick summary of the changes that have been incorporated in this latest version, please?
Yes, thank you, Doug. I think the first main change was we heard from the feedback after the last Finance and Administrative Committee meeting that there was interest in having more board representation. So we've moved to have the board membership change from 2 to 3 members. We have defined the terms for the members of the board and the external members. We have removed any references from shareholders to district and stakeholders. And we've added provisions for the committee member death or resignation to be able to keep the succession all in order. And then I guess we have also added the provision for outlining the activities should be conducted in accordance with the applicable standards or guidance. And then primarily that's with the QAR, the quality assurance review.
Thank you very much.
Mr.
So I think
Chair,
with that, yeah, please go ahead.
I apologize. Thank you. Melanie just let me know, and I apologize. There will not be changes made to the attachment. Those two changes with the open meetings law were included in this document. My mistake, it was put in at the last minute. So thank you, Melanie.
No problem. Thank you. All right, with that, I would like to open this for some discussion and questions from directors. I believe we have some questions and discussion to get through. I have an idea about how to approach this if we have any further questions. Just if I may, before we go into questions, one of the things we're trying to do is get this charter approved in October or at the latest in November, so that we are able to form the committee by the end of this year, given that one of the items proposed in the charter is that committee members will have served on the board for at least a year. So in the interest of time, let's see how our discussion goes. If there are any recommended changes to this, then General Counsel Snyder, I may have some questions just as to how we might be able to approach this for the board meeting at the end of the month, should there be any amendments that need to be crafted between now and then. So with that, I'd like to open the floor for questions and discussions to directors. And thank you to Reuben Brown for your work on this thus far. And thank you, Mr. McLeod, for shepherding this process along. So directors, please go ahead. Yes, Director Cook, please.
I'm going to have to switch to a different screen so I can see my highlighted copy. Thank you all for the work and the update from our prior session. Really appreciated that. And I get and agree with the need to get this going. There were a couple of questions I wanted to get with you about on page 1 of the audit committee charter. Under the purpose section, last statement says, except as otherwise required by applicable laws or regulations, all major decisions are considered by the board of directors as a whole. I didn't find, however, where those major decisions are defined or, and then combining that with what looks to be the actual decision authority and approval authority for the board. It looked like some pretty significant things fall to the board and don't in fact come to the, fall to the committee and don't in fact come to the board as a whole. Am I reading that right? Wherever it says it is empowered to, that means it's the final decision maker. Is that correct? That's my first question.
Thank you, Director Cook. And Dave, I'm wondering if you might chime in on that. I have some perspective based on where I think that terminology came from, but if you wouldn't mind starting us off, please, that would be great.
Yes, I believe the intent of that was to show that the board is ultimately having the authority, although the main, I guess, decisions and work will be decided, I guess, at the audit committee meetings. But in order to fulfill the oversight responsibilities of the board, we wanted to state that. So maybe the wording maybe could be massaged a little bit, but I'll leave that for discussion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please,
Yeah.
Dr. Cook.
So are you saying that that where it indicates approval capability by the audit committee, that in fact those are recommendations to the board as a whole, in each case or in some cases? Can you tell me, get me a better idea about that?
I can
Dave,
chime in here.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
please.
So yeah, and maybe it's best to give an example. And I think the first probably order of business would be to approve an audit plan, or the first direction, which maybe it's to update the enterprise risk assessment. But let's say that we move along, we create the audit plan, and it goes to the committee for approval. This approval would then, I guess, be done at the committee level. However, it would be, the board would be notified of the actions that had taken place.
Okay, but the board doesn't approve them, is what you're saying in that instance, correct?
I would believe that would be the most efficient way to run things. If the audit committee wanted to bring a more significant thing to the board, I would say that would be at the committee's discretion. And I may be speaking out of turn from what the ad hoc directors had maybe considered, but it would be my impression that the audit committee as formed would have the authority to make those approvals and then or make those decisions and approvals, and then anything significant like audit reports and things would be maybe just provided as attachments or information for the board at a later date.
So, okay, just for what it's worth to wrap up that topic, I think, remember everything we've heard from the APTA peer review committee, the folks who are in the same industry in this field considered the best from the state auditor twice, was that this function of oversight for the internal audit function in particular is a board responsibility. And I'm glad we've gotten 3 members now, majority of that subcommittee, but I don't think it's in keeping with that charge if in fact the board does not have decision-making ability on at least some of the major decisions. I would think the hiring, compensation, et cetera, of the chief audit executive ought to come to the board, maybe with a recommendation. This is just me. The approval of the internal audit plan, maybe this could be at the discretion of the committee members, but if there's a significant risk that's been raised, we need to address, involves significant monetary commitments, then the board ought to be briefed on that in a way that gives them a fuller understanding. So I'm a little bit, it would be my preference, one board member, as that instead of delegating virtually all approval capability to this committee, that some things come to the board, just in keeping with what we've been told as guidance for this function. So that was the first thing. And then I had a second question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, please go ahead, and then we'll return to that for some other.
Yeah,
sorry,
I'd like to take something else
please
that
go
would
ahead.
be too. Okay, and I'll try to be briefer about this. There's a mention where I got to get down to my note here, where there is you know what? Let me come back to it because I have to find my post-it on the PDF file. So if you wouldn't mind, but what it has to do with is what information comes to the board. And there is a section there where it references the board, but I thought it would be fairly easily done to tack onto that the board members who are not a part of the internal audit or the audit committee, that they would be able to access the packets plus the reports themselves, understanding that there may be in some cases a concern about sensitivity or exposing the agency to risk, that precautions could be made. But I think it's really important for the board members themselves to have access to all the information that's presented to the committee members. Okay, those are my two things. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cook. And I just would ask as other directors do chime in here on that first topic. Thank you for raising that. I do recognize most of our committees are structured as making a recommendation that then goes to the full board. And we could do one of two things. One thing we could do is do a carve out of what some of the, as you started to get into there, Director Cook, about what some of the substantial decisions are that would go through recommendation from committee and then to full board for approval, perhaps, for example, hiring decisions and so forth. I know that we're trying to get this into the agenda for the board meeting at the end of the month. I do have some thoughts about maybe how to approach that if we are looking at some changes, but just for the purposes of moving forward on the discussion, Dave, if you wouldn't mind just making note that we may need to think a little bit between now and the board meeting about whether we carve out particular responsibilities or if we just move initially to a full, as this committee functions, for example, recommendation for then board approval. We may need to have a discussion between now and the board meeting about how to approach that. And then to my fellow directors, as you chime in, if you do have a perspective on that, please feel free to weigh in on that point in case we have some additional work to do. So with that, thank you, Director Cook, for the comments. And Director Geisinger, please go ahead.
Great. Thanks so much. And thanks for both of your comments. I agree. I think that, it says major decisions will come to the board and then all the decisions, are really left to the committee. And I'm open to hearing if that's the way it needs to be. I thank you, first of all, for the work you did to listen to us before and make changes in this. I agree with trying to move this forward in October. I guess I don't feel strongly between the two sort of options that you're posing there, Chair. But I do feel like the information coming to the board needs to be with understanding the need for protections in compliance with the open meetings law, it needs to be fully available. And some of these decisions, I think the internal audit plan, is a major decision. Some of the hiring maybe, I think you mentioned as one of the first things that would happen with updating the risk assessment. I continue to have concerns about the risk assessment and how it was performed and what it came up with. I think I asked last time about discounting the board's input to 20%. And I think the answer was that's how it's always done or how you always do it. But, I'm not sure if you work with cities where that's done with city council. I'm not convinced that the things at the very top are the biggest threats to the agency. So I think that some of those decisions, like I say, I can be convinced to have all of those things decided by the committee, but I do think that we need to define what major decisions are and what the board weighs in on. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. I'm going to pause there just for a moment, Dave, to see if you have any comments on Director Geisinger's comments or on Director Cook's point about the distribution of materials, because I do believe, although it may not be explicitly captured here, and this may be an item we want to touch upon, the intent is to distribute all documentation to board members. So anyway, Dave, it's okay if you don't have any further comments, but is there anything you'd like to react to in the comments thus far?
Yeah, I would say I would agree with your last statement that it is intended for everything to go to the board. It's just we do recognize that your time is valuable and you may not want a full audit report to read through. It's customary to provide like the executive summaries to the full board, where the audit committee would have the full report to read, and obviously then to decide what is, if there's sensitive information to go to the full board. But agree that yes, all information should be coming your way, and I think maybe the right way to go there is to probably provide sort of like an SOP for the audit committee or for the internal audit function to what is then disseminated and provided to you, and certain things that can maybe go in advance of a committee meeting to or a prior month's committee meeting to kind of let you know, like this, yes, we will change the weighting on the risk assessment to, maybe it's 33% for all for management, senior management and board, something like that. And then we could, I don't know if it's more for informational or if that would go to votes, but I would think that from a timing perspective that a lot of that could be handled at the audit committee level.
Okay, thank you for sharing the comments, Dave. And the thing I would just also state too for everybody to be mindful of is, thanks for touching on standard operating procedures. I know one of the things that we're in the absence of right now is having the audit committee in place on its permanent basis. So once we establish the audit committee, we'll be looking at the risk universe, we'll be looking at the audit plan, and I think it's great that you touched on standard operating procedures. That's also where I think the committee can dive into issues about how do we handle sensitive information, which I believe we may have one or two things to address that we can take at that point. How to distribute materials, as well as how to weight board versus staff. I think a lot of that will fall into SOP discussions. So thanks for touching on that, and be a lot of work to do next year. The formation of the audit committee is certainly not a conclusion. It's a beginning. All right, thank you for allowing me to comment on that. I'm going to go ahead and call on Director Broom, please.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'd be a little uncomfortable saying that everything should be made immediately available to the general public. I can think that maybe you had an internal control review done and there were 4 or 5 weaknesses found, and you'd be telling people how to get in and exploit those weaknesses if you broadcast everything on that. The other thing is, if there were some comments that were critical of employees, then you're putting the employee's name in there, and I don't think that's right for all the world to see, because they haven't had a chance to rebut or anything.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Director Broom. I think that is a really important consideration, and that's along the lines of what I mentioned, that I think when we get to looking at how the function and the committee operate, we're going to have to do some thinking about even things along the lines of cybersecurity, for that matter, whether there is sufficient, whether we have sufficient room for executive session, for example, and I think we're going to have to tackle that. I see that actually Ms. Johnson has raised her hand, so no. Never mind. No worries. No problem at all. So yeah, thank you for those comments, Director Broom. I think that is really important. Dave, is there anything you want to comment along those lines in terms of standard practice, or any thoughts you have at this stage in terms of how to handle that?
No, I would 100% agree that there would be, discretion, and I think that would go into the SOPs as to what would be provided and what should be. And obviously, open record laws would if someone really wanted to find that information out, they could. But that's why it's customary to provide the summaries and not get into the details unless it's absolutely needed.
Thank you. That's a great point. Director Broom, do you have any follow-up comments on that?
No, I don't. The only other thing is that when you put together a document that's so specific and so, detailed out, you can kind of set yourself up by somebody else taking a look and saying, well, where's my report? How did you do on all these 76 items that were in here? In other words, I'd rather see something be be shorter, more generalized than something that's, but it's too late for that. I'm not going to pursue that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Director Broom. I appreciate the comments and feedback on that. I see Director Deschel in the queue next. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Director Davidson. I think, one other thing to chew on is we sort of think creatively about how we balance, what goes up to the full board and what doesn't. Is, borrowing from the land use world is a call-up rate for the board. Could be an option, which is to say if the committee approves, certain things that would typically fall in that, Director Geisner, book that you were describing as a major decision, the board would have the right to call that action up, similar to the way city councils call up planning decisions, not regularly, but it provides that sort of extra level of if the board, which basically sort of limits the scope to, hey, we're vesting a lot of trust in the committee, but if there's certain materiality items that get forwarded, the board has the right to call it up for full board approval after 10 days. The board has 10 days to say the audit committee met. I disagree. I want to call it up for full board approval. Basically, instead of saying it all goes up to the board, giving the board the option to call it up, therefore limiting the risk on what could be inadvertently shared, or to Director Broom's point, trying to keep that tight. So just want to offer that as a possible option as we think creatively here.
Thank you, Director Deschel. That's interesting perspective, and I'll comment for a moment and see if any directors have any response or feedback on that. But that is an interesting point, and I do think that there's a weakness and a strength here that, as Director Cook, you're pointing out on this issue of what is provided to the board, the charter does not explicitly call that out. That may be a strength in that we may have a little bit of work to do here on what our standard operating procedures will be. Director Deschel, you bring up a good point about how to maybe call that up. I guess maybe I'll just pause to see if there's any discussion on this, but my thought would be to not make any modifications at this point to the charter regarding the distribution of documentation, but that we are, perhaps amending the charter once we have some standard operating procedures set and we know how the mechanics of how we go through this. Perhaps we could revisit that to codify it into the charter, 6 months into the committee's function. Let me just kind of pause there and see if either Dave, from your perspective, or any of my board colleagues, there's any feedback on that, or I should say any disagreement with that. Okay. Seeing some thumbs up, but I see. Yeah. Please go ahead, Director Catlin.
I think we started out along this path by agreeing that we need to be flexible and nimble and be able to adjust as we go along. And it seems to me that if directors are feeling the need for more information, that we can certainly accommodate those requests. And I wouldn't be too prescriptive about exactly what. I mean, we can provide some examples of the major decisions, and we can say examples of these decisions are not limited to this list, but they're just examples of what we could use. So, I'm fine with including a few of those major decisions in the charter if that gives some comfort to Directors Cook and Geisinger. I'm fine with including some of those, but I don't want it to be too limiting. That's all.
Thank you, Director Catlin. Thank you. I think that's the point well made, and important for us to be flexible. So I think if everyone's generally okay with that direct, I'd like to come back to Director Cook's first point, which I think is a really good one, that we have this statement on page 1 about all major decisions going to the board as a whole, but we haven't really described those. So I have a question that I think maybe for General Counsel Snyder, and this would be, I would be open to the idea that we make some small adjustments to this. So looking at Mr. McLeod and Dave here, we may need to do a little bit of work together just to make some modifications, perhaps carve out those decisions. But in order to move this to the agenda at the end of the month, we're going to need to approve, if everybody's on board with approving this tonight. My question to General Counsel Snyder is, can we approve tonight, with the commitment that we'll work on an amendment here for the end of the month, pull this from unanimous consent and propose an amendment at the end of the month? So first, General Counsel Snyder, if you wouldn't mind just chiming in on whether the mechanics of that will suffice. And you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, clicked too quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Melanie Snyder, General Counsel. That was perfect. That's exactly what I was going to recommend, that you remove it from the consent agenda, both this and likely the internal audit function charter as well, with the understanding that the ad hoc committee members are going to work with Doug McLeod and myself and with the members at Reuben Brown and come up with any potential amendments. And I think in the interim, if directors have ideas or anything else that they want to consider, send that through to board staff so those can get compiled, and then plan to offer, sort of a consolidated amendment motion to amend at the board meeting.
Perfect. Okay, thanks for that, Ms. Snyder. I think that if that's the direction we decide to go tonight, then I would recommend to my colleagues that we move this forward tonight and then, work on the amendment between here and there, collecting that feedback as Ms. Snyder suggested there, and then we can propose an amendment at the board meeting. Dave, I see your hand came up on this, so thanks for waiting there, and please go ahead.
Well, I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner, but I did reference the audit function charter, and there is a section in there on page 2. The audit committee approves the internal audit charter, the risk-based internal audit plan, the internal audit function budget, and so on. So that is detailed out in that charter. So if the board or the committee was comfortable moving that along, I know you can't really put the cart before the horse, but in anticipation of reviewing the changes to, well, I guess that charter has already been approved, and those are just small changes that are being made to that. But I thought I would point that out.
Thank you for pointing that out. That is a good call out. If I may, for any directors who would like to chime in on this, and please feel free to, submit comments after the fact and email as you think about this. The question I have, we can talk about this tonight, and again, please submit feedback. I believe our next ad hoc meeting is next Monday. The question on my mind is, what should be carved out, if anything? So, actually, Dave, thanks for pointing that out. On page 2 of the internal audit function charter, there are several bullets about the committee's approval of the charter itself, the risk-based plan, the budget, etc. So, Director Cook, I think if I'm understanding your concern, and I share it, is that there may be some things, if not everything, that needs to be carved out for the board. So that's the question I would ask my colleagues, is what would you like to carve out? we can discuss that now. You could submit that in writing and we can collect that feedback. I would just ask that any feedback that we collect be done by this upcoming Sunday, by end of day, so that we can be discussing it at our Monday ad hoc meeting and work quickly over 2 to 3 days to form an amendment. So do any directors have any comments on that? Director Cook, you raised the issue. Is there anything you'd like to comment on it at this time?
No, thank you. I think it's a good approach. I appreciate that.
Great. And General Counsel Snyder, please go ahead.
Thank you. And so just for clarity, so that we can respect the open meetings law, we're asking directors to submit that through the board office so that the board office can compile that. We're not going to have emails going around to all the different directors.
Thank you for providing that clarity and reminder. Yes, please submit any comments you have to the board office, and then we can work at committee on Monday at the ad hoc committee to understand those comments. Thank you very much. Okay, any further questions, any further discussion? All right, I'm going to go ahead and do a roll call vote on this. To be clear, we are voting to approve the charter and move forward to the end of the month. The idea is that we will likely we'll certainly pull this from consent agenda, unanimous consent agenda. We will likely be proposing an amendment at the end of the month. So you can always vote no at that time if you're not happy with the amendment. So as the charter is currently written, I'm going to call for the roll vote to approve and move forward. So going down the list here, Director Broom.
Yes.
Director Catlin.
Yes.
Director Cook.
Yes.
Director Deschel.
Yes.
Director Geisinger.
Yes.
Director Whitmore.
Aye.
And I am also a yes vote. So that is 7 yes votes, 0 no. That is unanimously moving forward. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody here for a discussion and working this in the committee. I appreciate it. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next recommended action. This is related. It is for the internal approval of the internal audit function charter. This is for the board of directors to adopt the amended internal audit function charter. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
All right. I had Geisinger as the mover and Whitmore as the second again, with how the order that I heard that. So similar, we'll have a discussion here. Any questions about this? But first, I'd like to see if Mr. McLeod, Dave, if you have any information that you'd like to present about this item.
This is Doug McLeod. I think just a quick background reminder. So the last time the internal audit function charter was approved was in July of 2021. We've made a few changes since that time, got board feedback and this committee feedback in September, similar to the audit committee charter. This internal audit function charter really lays out the scope of responsibilities for the internal audit function, which Ruben Brown will be providing to RTD. Dave, do you have anything that you wanted to point out, any changes?
No, I think that's entirely correct. I think that really just to change it to allow for a service provider to be that internal audit function.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, we all got a lot more familiar with this one last year. A couple changes as we marry these two up. If there are any amendments that impact this charter, we can also address that at the ad hoc committee and make any adjustments we need by the end of the month. Any questions or discussion from directors? All right. Well, I'm feeling pretty good about this one, given the discussion and what we did in the last one. So I'll do this one with any no votes. Are there any no votes on this action? All right, seeing none, we will approve that unanimously with 7 ayes, 0 noes, and that will also move forward for the evening. So thank you very much. Dave, thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. I know we've had you on a lot of meetings here, and yeah, I hope you're not getting sick of us because there's more to come. Thank you for joining us.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to go ahead and move on to the third action item of the evening. This is regarding the Family and Medical Leave Insurance or Family Program participation. This is for the Board of Directors to opt out of the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program. I'll first ask, do we have a motion?
So moved, Michelle.
A second?
Second.
Mover, Director Deschel. Second is Director Broom. So I will now ask Ms. Leah Riley, our Chief Administrative Officer, to please present this item.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Leah Riley, the Chief Administrative Officer, and this evening I am going to briefly discuss FAMLY, which is an abbreviation for Family and Medical Leave Insurance, which is a state-run paid leave program that builds upon the Federal Family Medical Leave Act, otherwise known as FEMLA. In November of 2020, Colorado voters approved Proposition 118, paving the way for this new program, which was designed to ensure all Colorado workers have access to paid leave in order to take care of themselves and their family during life circumstances that require leave from their work. The program is funded by a 0.9% premium on employee wages that begins in January of 2023. Family provides 12 weeks of paid leave per year, which is similar to FEMLA. However, Family goes beyond FEMLA by covering a percentage of an employee's salary during the leave, extending the definition of a family member beyond immediate family to grandparents, grandchildren, siblings, and any other individual with whom the employee has a significant personal bond, providing safe leaves for the employee if they or a family member are the victim of domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, or abuse, and providing an additional 4 weeks of leave for complications due to pregnancy or childbirth. Under the new law, any family leave that also qualifies for FEMLA has to run concurrently. However, Family provides income to the employee during the leave, whereas FEMLA does not. Should an employee take family leave for a circumstance that does not qualify for FEMLA, the employee is still eligible for up to 12 weeks of FEMLA leave subsequently. And employers are not allowed to require their employees to first use paid time off or sick and vacation leave to be paid under Family. Eligibility for Family is based on earnings. The employee has to have earned at least $2,500 within the previous 4 quarters. They have to have been employed by the same employer for 12 months, and they have to have worked a minimum of 1,250 hours. The paid benefits under the Family program are determined by the state average weekly wage, or SAW, plus the employee's wages. An employee is eligible to receive a weekly payment equal to 90% of the SAW plus 50% of their wages above the SAW, and payments cannot exceed $1,100 weekly. Again, as I said before, the program is funded by a premium of 0.9% on employee wages, and this is split between the employer and the employee. And the premium applies to all wages to the Social Security max, which is currently $147,000 annually. As I said before, premium collections will begin on January 2023, but employees will become eligible for paid benefits in January of 2024. Family affects local governments, of which RTD falls under the definition, differently than private businesses. The statute was written to give local governments options to participate. Local governments can participate fully, decline full participation, or decline employer participation. And should a local government choose to opt out, it has to do so before the end of calendar year 2022, and its governing authority, which is the board, has to hold a public vote to do so. A local government that elects to fully participate in Family has to remain in the program and agree to pay premiums for a minimum of 3 years. The estimated financial impact to RTD of opting into Family is over $2 million annually, but that would be split equally between the agency and its employees. As I mentioned previously, the board has to take a vote and public testimony prior to any Family vote, and notice of the vote has to be provided to employees of the public. And if the when the board takes a vote, it's not permanent. It has to be reconsidered every 8 years. And the board's vote is all or nothing. The board cannot opt in certain groups of RTD employees and opt out others. RTD currently provides employees access to paid leave to take care of themselves and their family during life circumstances that pull them away from their jobs. However, in recognizing the leaves under the family program build upon these benefits and circumstances, staff recommends the board vote to opt out of mandatory participation in family to enable employees to decide what is best for their own situation. By doing so, the board will excuse compulsory premiums on all employees regardless of their participation. It is very important to note no employee will receive a reduction in benefits regardless of their decision to participate in family. On Monday, September 26, 2022, the general manager and CEO provided a memorandum to all employees with information regarding the family program's premiums and benefits. I facilitated a virtual lunch and learn session for all employees on Wednesday, September 9th, 2022 to further educate and inform employees on the family program and to provide notification of this recommended action. In addition, informational posters outlining all benefits available to employees, including those that would become available from the family program, have been placed in all break rooms at RTD facilities. And lastly, on October 6, 2022, Adam Barnett, manager of Total Rewards, provided notice via email to all RTD employees informing them of this meeting and the upcoming board vote on October 25th, 2022. Adam provided information on how to submit written comments or provide public testimony during each meeting. This advance notification has exceeded the family requirements and has allowed ample time for employees to prepare for this meeting and the upcoming meeting on October 25th. Thank you, and I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Riley. That is very helpful. I appreciate it. And I would also just like to thank you, as well as Ms. Johnson, for the communication to employees and making sure the information is understood and disseminated. And I know that this was, don't have a lot of time to understand all of this or work on it. So thank you for all the work that's gone into providing this recommendation. So at this time, I'll go ahead and open the floor to directors who may have questions or any comments for Ms. Riley or for anybody. Yes, Dr. Geisinger, please.
Thank you very much. A lot of work clearly has gone into this. It sounds like the communication's been really good. I'm just trying to understand. So an employee could still put the 0.45% choose to do that. Is that right?
If I may, Chair Davidson.
Please go ahead. Yes, yeah.
Yes, Director Geisinger, that's absolutely correct. And something that I failed to mention in my talking points is that what RTD is proposing is to cover the administrative costs of supporting any RTD employee who wants to participate in the family program. So that means that RTD would hire an administrator to take the wage premium out of the employee's paycheck and also submit to the state the wage, corresponding wage and labor data that's required by the state. So we'd be supporting any of our employees who wanted to participate.
Oh, good, thanks. And how does the actual benefit work if they're participating and we aren't? Is it a smaller total that they can get, or?
It is not, Director Geisinger. Whether RTD participates or not, any RTD employee that chooses to participate in the program by choosing to commit to the 0.45% of the wage premium will receive 100% of the benefits of the family program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to you both for that discussion. Director Deschel, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. If I heard you correctly, and I think I'm understanding this correctly, the family program expanded the definition of who's family. Is that correct? And if so, is there any plan to sort of include that expanded definition in our current benefits offering?
Director Deschel, there is not an intent to extend the definition of family within the current benefits that RTD offers. However, I will point out that under the existing Healthy Family for Workers Act in the state of Colorado would provide a lot of the same benefits under the family program that goes beyond what FEMLA does. And our employees will have access to that program as they always have.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to be a no vote on this one. Thought a lot about it, but I think for me, I get concerned that we're, the argument for saying, oh, we'll let people decide what's best for themselves is a similar argument to why you would provide a 401k or a retirement plan. We'll let people decide for themselves if they want to invest in their retirement. Let people decide for themselves if they want to invest in a rainy day. I think for low-income folks, perhaps for our frontline workers, to supplement your income up to $1,100 a week if you have an emergency, and not have to use the rest of your sick time and PTO time, which is your frankly only other access to income, is tough for me to say, especially for people who are living paycheck to paycheck, or who are struggling. In the immediate, they may say, actually, I really need that 0.49%. I think in the aggregate, I just happen to think that giving that to folks and giving them that option to be paid when they need to take time off is important. And I think especially as the traditional family expands, it's really important, for folks who are raised by their grandparents, for folks who have sort of a broader definition of family, to be able to get compensated time off if there's a serious health condition or significant health event that occurs. If I'm misunderstanding, please feel free to butt in. But as I see it, I think, we're effectively telling folks, unless we don't set up an alternative program for folks to still get that expanded family definition and still get paid for that time off, which I think City and County of Denver has done, and some of the other jurisdictions that have opted out have done. So appreciate all the work that's gone into it, but it's the end of my soliloquy.
Thank you, Director Deschel, for those comments. Was there anything that you are looking for a reaction for in there from staff?
Was there anything I said that was inaccurate?
Director Deschel, I don't believe anything you said was inaccurate, but I would just like to underscore the fact that any employee at RTD is eligible to participate in the family program, and participating with a 0.45% of their wage premium will get 100% of the benefits of family. So we're not denying any employee any benefits of the family program at all. So they'll have full access to it.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Which is, I still think, awesome, by the way. We're not saying no, that's something that's great. So I'm all set.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you for the comments on that. Director Broom, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, there's 3 options available: participate fully, decline participation fully, or decline employer participation and provide an alternative. If you want to vote in favor of the second one, decline participation fully, then you'd vote no on this. Is that correct?
No, actually, Ms. Riley, would you like to clarify that?
So, Director Broom, there are 3 options, as you noted, from the family program for local governments. What staff is recommending to the board to approve is for RTD to opt out of the family program from the employee standpoint, but to offer its employees an alternative, which, as I articulated earlier, would be to allow, of course, all employees to participate, and for RTD to cover all the administrative costs for the employee participation of the program.
So, Director Broom, does that answer the question that if we were to vote yes on this action, we are voting to opt out, however, to offer that we will administratively cover the administrative costs and assistance for all those employees who would opt in. Does that answer your question, Director Broom?
Yeah, I think it does, but it just seems like you've got a tricycle with two wheels.
Oh, Director Broom, I think we're losing your audio. It's not me, is it?
I'm going to vote no on this because I'm not sure that I agree with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Broom. Seeing no other, oh, go ahead, Director Geisinger, please.
Sorry, just one more quick question, make sure I understand. If we were fully in, then everybody would have to, we would withdraw the 0.45% whether they wanted us to or not. Is that right?
That is correct, Director Geisinger. If RTD's board chooses to opt into the program, RTD will be compelled to pay 0.9% on all RTD employees to the state for the program, whether they choose to participate or not.
This seems like a reasonable direction to go to give people the choice and they can still get the benefits. So I'll be a yes vote.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. I have just two questions. Perhaps one is a little qualitative, but the quantitative question first, which I believe we don't know the answer to yet, and I know is still a work in progress. But Ms. Riley, do we yet know the cost of covering the administrative, of assisting employees on the administrative side, should we decide to opt out? Do we yet have those expenses?
Director Davidson, we do not. We've been in constant contact with our insurance broker. The companies that are going to be offering these services are waiting for final rulemaking from the state before they can quote us premiums. They're anticipating those to happen by the end of October, but I don't believe it's going to be financially burdensome to RTD to cover those administrative costs.
Okay, thank you. And just a quick follow-up question on that same point, if I may. Is it fair to assume that whatever the cost of administering this would be essentially the same or close? If we were to opt in, it would, the financial impact would be our contribution as stated in the packet plus the administrative cost, whereas an opt-out would just be the administrative cost, and that administrative cost would be the same regardless of the path. Is that correct?
That's correct, Director Davidson.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Catlin, I see your hand up, please.
Thank you. Leah, I was just wondering, based on your outreach, both you and GM CEO Johnson's outreach to employees, have you been able to gauge what the level of interest in participating is from our employees?
Thank you for the question, Director Catlin. I have not received any feedback from the Lunch and Learn and don't have any estimate of what our employees' interest is. So I can't answer that.
If I may, Director Davidson.
Please, go ahead.
Director Catlin. So the input that I did receive thus far, employees just wanted to know if in fact, would they still be receiving benefits from RTD, which is yes, they will be. So that's the level of feedback I've gotten from those from our labor partners, as well as from some employees that reached out to me directly.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Director Catlin. Does that answer your question, Dr. Catlin?
It does. I just, I was just thinking if there were only a handful of people who chose to participate and contribute, would that be worth the administrative cost to the agency if it was just a handful of people versus maybe 50% of our employees? I just don't know. You get some economies of scale when you have a larger pool. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah, thank you, Director Catlin. And that actually covers my more qualitative question that I had, which was what feedback we had received thus far from employees. I think this makes sense. Thank you for the work that you put into this. I think it's good that, our employees will have the ability to benefit from this should they choose to opt in individually. I think that I will be a yes on this. I would just ask, and I'm sure we will communicate very clearly to our employees, just as Director Deschel, you called out, so that people understand what an opt-in and an opt-out means at an individual level. So with that, seeing no further discussion or questions, I'd like to thank everybody involved. Yes, Director Whitmore, please.
I'm sorry, I'm confused on the vote of yes or no. The ask was to opt out, and so a yes vote is to opt out, correct?
That's right. A vote yes is a vote to opt out, for RTD to opt out of the participation, which means that our employees can make the individual decision to opt in or out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for clarifying. Yes, it's a vote yes to opt out. So thank you for clarifying that. Okay, I'll go ahead, given the discussion, and call for a roll vote at this point in time. Director Broom, please.
No.
Director Catlin.
Yes.
Director Cook.
Yes.
Director Deschel.
No.
Director Geisinger.
Yes.
Director Whitmore.
Yes.
And I am a yes. So that will be 5 aye votes, 2 no votes. The recommended action will move forward. So thank you very much for the discussion, for the questions. I think some thoughtful comments there. Ms. Riley and Ms. Johnson, thank you for the presentation and the remarks. All right, we're going to go ahead and move to our 4th action. This is the second amendment to the RTD Salary Defined Contribution Plan. This is for the Board of Directors to approve an amendment to the Salaried Employee Defined Contribution Retirement Plan to retain $200,000 in annual forfeitures for administrative expenses. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
I have the mover as Director Broom, the second as Director Deschel. Thank you very much. I will go ahead and please ask Mr. Doug McLeod, Chief Financial Officer, to present any pertinent information to this action.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to give a little more background on what we're asking for with this request, the 401A plan, also known as a defined contribution plan, is open to non-represented employees that were hired January 1st, 2008 and thereafter. Any of the employees that were hired prior to that point are in the actual defined benefit pension plan. So for this DC plan or 401A plan, there's a guiding document, a plan document. In that plan document, it currently calls for withholding of $100,000 annually of any forfeitures. Those forfeitures occur because there is a 5-year vesting schedule for these employees that participate in this plan. I should mention that the board had approved a 9% contribution to this plan based on wages during 2022. So if I'm an employee, if I don't make it to my 5-year anniversary, I forfeit any of the contributions that have been put into that plan on by RTD on my behalf. So it's a cliff vesting, 100% at 5 years, no vesting prior to that point. Any of those forfeited funds are left within the trust. The trust uses those funds to pay administrative expenses up to $100,000. I don't know how long that policy has been in place at $100,000, but over the years, the costs have increased with insurance, investment advisors, legal advice, et cetera. It's a relatively low cost, low involvement plan because it's really a contributory plan in which the employee directs their investments. However, the costs have exceeded those forfeitures that are retained in the plan. Just to give you an idea of scale, currently there's about $850,000 in forfeitures in that plan. So there's ample funding to pay the additional costs, which last year in 2021 exceeded $100,000. They were $134,000. We expect those costs to continue to rise, not extraordinarily, but there's not enough funding left in the fund to continue to pay those administrative expenses. So what this amendment is seeking committee and board approval for, since board has the authority over those plan documents, is to increase the withholding of those funds, those forfeitures, from $100,000 up to $200,000. Of course, the trustees would monitor that. If too much money is left in there, more than enough money over time is left within that fund, we'd make arrangements to pull that money back to RTD. And those conclude my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. McLeod, as always. Appreciate the information. I'll go ahead and open the floor for discussion and questions, starting with Director Whitmore, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question for Doug. Is this type of payment of fees through forfeiture of funds standard operating procedure in other entities or other industries? I assume it is, but I just wanted to get that on the record.
Great question. Yes, thank you for the question. That's true. Forfeitures are used to pay administrative expenses. In fact, on the DC plan that we are setting up for new employees, new represented employees, according to the collective bargaining agreement, which is effective January 1st, there are no forfeitures there, and we do have administrative expenses setting that plan up. So we did provide upfront funding, and so it's usually the contributing agency that contributes those amounts for which the expenses RTD is the only ones that could pay those expenses. So it's just a matter of which bucket of money it comes out of. So yeah, it's very, very common.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Yeah, thank you for asking the question for the record there, and thank you, Mr. McLeod. Other questions or any further discussion on this action? Being none, I will go ahead and call for the vote. I will do this by asking, are there any no votes? Right. Seeing no votes, we have 7 ayes, 0 noes, and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We will move to our next 5th action item of the evening. This is with regards to the 2023 fiscal policy. This is for the Board of Directors to approve the 2023 fiscal policy. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
The mover as Director Geisinger, the second as Director Catlin. So I'll now go ahead and hand it over once again to Mr. Doug McLeod, Chief Financial Officer, to present the item.
Thank you. The fiscal policy sets the guidance for the 2023 fiscal year. The board last approved the fiscal policy in October of last year for October of 21 for 2022. We bring this policy to the committee, then the board for approval, since it's a policy in itself. But we usually bring it in the fall timeframe to align with our budgeting and forecasting in the midterm financial plan, because it really sets the guideposts for how we develop that plan or how we develop the budget for the next year. We can always adjust it more often if necessary if something were to change, such as when COVID occurred. We did make some adjustments to the fiscal policy. I would mention that within your package, there's a red line version and a final version. That red line version points out what has changed since the last policy that was approved. There's really just 2 changes within this requested policy modification. One is a very minor change to clarify the name of the investment policy. We referred to the investment policy statement. We removed the word statement because it's called the 2023 investment policy. The other change is also redlined. It's on the final page of the fiscal policy. And what had been put in the fiscal policy circa 2020, early 2020, late 2019 was as COVID was appearing, there was concern about the economic impacts that would have to RTD. Several measures were taken to reduce costs. And in response, we wanted to have something as a company within that policy that would address funding to restore certain items should additional funding occur, given the landscape at that point in time and the forecast for a big decrease in sales taxes and other funding. We believe it's time to remove those policies. We think that we're past some of those challenges. The funding is in good shape, and as we'll discuss later in our budget discussion, and as we discussed in our midterm financial plan, we're in pretty darn good financial shape at this point in time, and those really don't apply. So those are the main changes that we're requesting from the committee. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. Yes, and great to remove those COVID response policies at the end that were reactionary and crisis mode, and a great job to you and your team for not being in that crisis situation. So with that, I will open the floor for any discussion or questions from directors. Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, Director Deschel, I thought you might might be raising your hand. Go ahead, sir. Thank you.
Raise hand button. Yeah, I'd like to move to amend the proposed policy under expenditures policies, adding a number 8. RTD will consider the social cost of carbon, methane, and nitrous oxide, open paren. Each is calculated by the U.S. Interagency Working Group on social cost of greenhouse gases, close paren, calculating the cost effectiveness of expenditures.
All right, I have an amendment as stated by Director Deschel. To vote on that, to discuss that, I need a second. Do I have a second for the amendment? I will go ahead and second the amendment. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to second it to move the conversation forward, but.
All right, great. Same page. I'd love to discuss this. So we have the mover as Director Deschel, and the second is Director Geisinger. So I'll open up the floor for discussion on the amendment from Director Deschel. So first of all, Director Deschel, thank you for sending out in an email the thoughts on the amendment, and also I'd personally like to thank you for raising the issue. I wanted to have some discussion around this. I think I'm a no vote on the amendment, but I would love to hear and see if our board, first of all, if the committee views this as a priority, has some discussion around this, and if this is something that we move forward as a priority on, perhaps we can partner with staff, Ms. Johnson, Mr. McLeod, to explore ways to address the intent here. So anyway, with that, I just wanted to, thanks for allowing me to inject my comments, but I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for any discussion on this amendment. Director Deschel, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you to those of you who reached out during the day today. I wanted to sort of provide a framework for the logic behind bringing the amendment, and hopefully provide some clarity, I think, on what this is and what it means. So the cost of carbon, generally speaking, is an intent. It's happening.
If you wouldn't mind holding one moment, Director. Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, we just were having a hard time with audio. Go ahead.
So social cost of carbon is something that's happened both at the state level as well as at the federal level, which is the idea is that public agencies, when they're making policy decisions, when they're making recommendations, should include the social cost of carbon, which is a way of capturing, so we use the economics, a way of capturing the negative externalities from the emissions that are generated by a purchase or by a regulatory or policy making change. And so the idea by incorporating this into our expenditures is to have RTD think about that. And I emailed a second note about capital improvement, which frankly the second sentence was redundant. The social cost of carbon includes the entire life cycle of the purchase. But I think, in talking to folks, I think there's a materiality component, right? Should the social cost of carbon be considered for our procurement of ballpoint pens? Probably not. It's probably not a material component in which we need an analysis on the social cost of carbon. But the idea is to say, to align with our sustainability goals, to align that we've stated, both in our Reimagine RTD, to align with, community value. We've heard loudly from the state that monitoring greenhouse gases and reducing greenhouse gases are important. And we've seen that transportation is one of those sectors where we can see pretty big improvements. So incorporating the social cost of carbon is one method of when you're making purchasing decisions of going through this. For what it's worth, Colorado PUC requires utility companies to include the social cost of carbon, or SCC, so I don't trip up on my words, in the utilities ERP plans, so the energy resource plans. Whitmore, making sure you're still here. So, utilities, folks who submit to the PUC, this is a normal part of the process when you're thinking about planning and making purchases, and purchases that are going to be made. The EPA has put out reports about this. The FTA, policy 00064, has been evaluating the social cost of carbon. And so it is a regular part of discussion. And I recognize that if you are not working in the renewables or electric world, that this might be a relatively new concept. But I think it's one worth discussing, and especially thinking about as we align our purchasing choices, our spending choices, and our budgeting choices with our values and our stated values, that we see that alignment top to bottom, including in the way in which we spend. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions if folks have them on the amendment. The staff may have questions as well. I know folks may have questions of staff, so I will.
Thank you very much, Director Deschel. Yeah, before, and we can open the floor to get some input from staff here in a moment. I'll go ahead and call on some directors with hands up here. Director Broom, I see that your hand up is up, please.
Just a question, what page are we referring to?
The policy itself is on packet page 29. The language of the amendment was distributed by Ms. McManus earlier today, sometime this morning, or possibly yesterday. Don't frankly recall.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I can pull that up on the screen with the
Sure, thank
amended
you.
language.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Thanks for offering that. That'd be great. This is the proposed amendment into the fiscal policy. Thank you for putting that in there and pulling that up. Appreciate that. Director Cook.
Actually, I wanted to ask staff. Director Deschel was kind enough to send through some links to relevant articles. One of them was Harvard case study where consultants, I think, or the academics had gone through and helped to analyze the purchase of or electrification of a school buses fleet. And they used the social cost of carbon to do it. And in calculating that cost, they mentioned several tools that they had access to in order to evaluate that. Do we have, I think we talked at the retreat about starting to get arms around the emissions that we can point to as a result to, or a reduction of emissions actually to, that we can point to as a result of our operations. Do we, what do we have in that way in terms of capability, Mr. McLeod or otherwise?
Mr. McLeod, you're on mute. And also, I do see, Ms. Johnson, your hand is raised, so please go ahead if you'd like as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. McLeod, did you want to speak and then I'll follow up?
No, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
All right. So thank you very much, Director Cook, for your question. So as it relates to what we're doing overarchingly, EPA does have a calculator that one could utilize and have used that to discern, what we're doing from a sustainability vantage point to get an idea of how we're progressing. That's readily available. I don't believe that I have used that here at RTD. That's why I wanted to yield the floor to Mr. McLeod, but that is available as we go forward, overarchingly. And I'll yield the floor because I have other comments holistically, and perhaps I'll say this, I think what would be advantageous for staff, you know, if there's going to be an environmental sustainability policy, we have that established. In totality, so we have an understanding of what we're doing from a financial vantage point, from an investment vantage point, from an asset management vantage point, from a service delivery vantage point, I think would be most advantageous for staff as opposed to having them individually. Because then we have an understanding that we should be taking this in alignment with our strategic plan, recognizing what our priorities are for community value. So then we have this clear directive as we go forward that this is more or less the backbone in relationship to everything we're doing, because that's the policy of the board. So that's what I would offer up to this discussion.
Yeah, and that would have been my follow-up question is, you know, my preference would be to say, you know, let's move forward in this space. Let's lead as Director Deschel talked about, but you all would develop the plan and such. What's your time frame for that?
If I can, I'm sorry, I'm working on my laptop in a hotel room too, and this is like.
No problem.
Okay, thank you so much. So recognizing we are making strides as we go forward, but there's a myriad of things that we have to do, and I believe I've shared this with the board previously, as we determine our path forward relative to our assets and what it is that we need to do collectively to get us in a place where we could leverage this. I believe there is a commitment from all of us in relationship to doing this, but I would have to confer to staff, recognizing the prioritization as we look at this holistically.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the comments on that. And Director Deschel, please go ahead.
Yes, just say, I think, you know, from my vantage point, it's this issue of climate, carbon, and climate justice, recognizing that many of the social costs of carbon disproportionately fall on protected communities. You know, if we had some clearer line of sight, I think, on, hey, we're planning to bring a comprehensive climate policy plan by Q1 23, you know, which is going to include all these different components. I think it would provide, certainly me and maybe others on the board, that comfort of, you know, maybe we don't do it piecemeal down this way. I think a comprehensive plan is what makes the most sense. But I think in the absence of that sort of line of sight of, yeah, Q1 2023, Q2 2023, we're going to have this for you all for your consideration. The climate emergency is here, is pressing, and is impacting our communities. And I think, you know, we have an opportunity to lead here. I think we led when we had one of the biggest electric fleets in the country. And then that fell off, right? And that's not place blame on my fingers, but it's to really say, you know, the climate urgency is here. And I think if we can get sort of a clear commitment from staff on, yeah, we're going to bring forward a comprehensive climate-related policy that aligns with the strategic plan, I think that would certainly give me more comfort. I think it's good for us to continue to have these discussions and have folks think through the ways in which climate impacts our entire agency. But I think that's, you know, sort of part of the reason of bringing it forward tonight is that let's move the ball forward, right? If this amendment passes, awesome. If it doesn't pass, also fine. But I think it's really critical that we keep this top of mind, push this forward, and sort of think collaboratively about what does putting together a climate policy look like. Because it is, you know, while it's operations, those are capital investments and those are purchase choices. So I think it's just as much finance as it is ops.
Thank you, Director Deschel. Thank you for adding that. And Ms. Johnson, thank you for your comments. Director Geisinger, please.
Just to support those comments completely, I'd love to see the agency schedule and start work on a sustainability climate sort of plan. And I agree, we're in urgent times. I think everybody knows that. And, I think that's the way to approach all of this. So I'd like to see that move forward.
Thank you very much, Director Geisinger. Thanks for the comments on everybody. And if I understand correctly, Ms. Johnson, if I might just clarify, your comments were along the lines of, let us come back with a comprehensive plan and comprehensive approach so that then we can, all things, whether it's fiscal policy, procurement practices, et cetera, can feed into that comprehensive plan. Is that a correct characterization of your comments and ask?
Chair Davidson, if I may.
Yes, please.
Yes, that is the direction. That's what I was implying. Well, that's what I was stating as we go forward, and it will give me an opportunity to understand collectively as we talk with staff what we can map out going forward.
Great. Thank you very much. I did want to make a comment on this again. Director Deschel, thank you for raising this. Yeah, completely agreed. The climate crisis is upon us, and, we all have to live with it. So, I appreciate you raising this and bringing this forward. I do have some hesitations about going into fiscal policy on this without that comprehensive plan and how that might interface with procurement, et cetera, and our fiduciary decisions. But I do think we need to tackle this. So I wanted to clarify that I'll be a no vote on this amendment, but I'm very appreciative of this coming up. And the ask that I would have both to the committee as well as board at large and our staff is that we work together to figure out, what that means and how we might, what policies do need to change, financial and otherwise, to put together a comprehensive plan. Just given those comments there, Mr. McLeod, I'm just curious if there's anything you'd want to weigh in on the implications of, the fiscal policy, or if there's anything further that you would add beyond what's already been discussed.
I totally agree. I think it makes a lot of sense to have one policy that one guiding document that all these policies point to provide consistency in language, et cetera.
Great. Thank you for the comments. I think Director Cook, Director Deschel, great points about, we need some visibility to where that's happening, when that's happening. In the absence of that, we could end up with some piecemeal things like this. Seeing no hands up, I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote on the amendment itself, and then we'll go back to the main motion. I do have the mover as Director Deschel with the amendment, and the second is Director Geisinger. I'll go through and do a roll call vote. This is for the amendment. For the additional language proposed by Director Deschel and as sent out by the board office earlier today and shown on screen by Mr. McLeod. So on the amendment, Director Broom.
No.
Director Catlin.
No.
Director Cook.
No.
Director Deschel.
Yes.
Director Geisinger.
No.
Director Whitmore?
No.
I will be a no vote, so that will be 1 yes, 1 aye, 6 no's. Director Deschel, thank you very much for bringing this forward. I think that, you get some good discussion and some good urgency around this. Let's make sure, and I think my ask, thanks for the leadership on this. If this goes by, too long and we're not feeling the visibility, please bring that back to committee on other matters, and let's make sure to address that. So thank you for bringing that forward. The amendment is not moving forward. We'll go back to the main motion. Is there further discussion, any further questions regarding the main motion for the approval of the 2023 fiscal policy? Director Deschel, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you all. And just to provide clarity, I know I emailed out 2 amendments. I will not be bringing the second one because it's the same exact thing, just for capital improvement policy. I appreciate Director Johnson, CEO Johnson, Mr. McLeod's commitment, and everyone's really commitment here to looking at a comprehensive plan and bringing that forward, and really pushing to lead here as we really help redefine the agency. And I think, under the new leadership, really sort of push forward as we imagine RTD and pushing all of this forward. So I appreciate the conversation, but for the sake of the record and sake of open records, you want to go back and say, why didn't you bring the other one? It's clear to me that we have a great collaborative group who's willing to roll up their sleeves and put in the time to put together a great plan. So I will not be the second amendment.
Thank you for those comments, Director Deschel, and thank you. That makes sense. Very much appreciate the collaborative spirit of the committee here and staff. So thank you to everybody for the discussion. All right, so seeing no further discussion, I will go ahead and once again call, are there any no votes on this motion? Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously with 7 ayes and 0 noes. Once again, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the collaborative spirit. All right, we're going to move on to our final action, recommended action of the evening. This is with regards to, sorry, I'm losing my place here, to our budget. One moment here. I went through our amendments here. So, I'm sorry. This is why I've lost track of where I am. My apologies. That concludes our recommended actions. We're going to go into our discussion items. Sorry, everybody. Thanks for bearing with me.
Mr. Chair, have we
yes.
approved the investment policies? Was there a second?
Oh, thank you. We have not. We've not. I got myself all discombobulated here in the notes and the amendments and tracking this. So thank you very much for helping me keep on track there. We will move forward to our final recommended action. It turns out I can count. This will be our 2023 investment policy, and this is for the Board of Directors to approve the 2023 investment policy. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, I have the mover, Director Cook, the second as Director Deschel. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. So I will open the floor now to our staff. I believe we have Mr. Doug McLeod, Chief Financial Officer, as well as Mr. Brendan Morgan, Senior Manager of Debt and Investments, to present this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very similar to the fiscal policy, we bring the investment policy for board consideration for approval for 2023, the next fiscal year. We bring that forward once a year, or more often if any statutory changes occur or if there's any other recommendations. So I would point out that our investment policy at RTD is pretty restrictive, sets out many requirements and statutory language as to what we can and cannot invest taxpayer funds in. Most notably, we cannot, RTD cannot invest in equities just due to the volatile and risky nature of those. So it's really, the statutory requirements are really surrounded around very safe type investments. I would say that RTD's policy goes a step further and is even just a bit more restrictive than that, with an eye towards safety, liquidity, and yield in those orders, just to ensure that our money is kept safe, or taxpayer money is well protected. So with that, our investments are typically invested, for the majority of our investments are in federal instruments, mainly treasuries and T-bills, as well as some federal agency securities, all interest rate paying investments, fixed income investments. So they're considered risk-free for the most part, especially the treasury issuances. We do have a handful of private company fixed income investments with private entities, publicly traded entities. However, it's a very small portion. Our investment policy also lays out the percentage of the portfolio that may be invested in each type of asset class. So it's restrictive in that respect as well. I'd like to point out that within the board document, we did point out within the board memo, we did point out that Directors Deschel and Lewis had requested back in the July timeframe that staff take a look at possibly incorporating what's referred to as an ESG policy, environmental social governance policy, somewhat similar to the discussion we just had. In reviewing that, Senior Manager of Debt and Investments, Brendan Morgan, collected 13 local government agency investment policies for perspective to see if there were other agencies incorporating such language. We only found 2, and the language was very benign, wasn't very specific. And upon further review of our restrictive investment policies regarding primarily investing in federal government agency bonds, essentially, those ESG type policies wouldn't necessarily apply because we're not allowed to invest in, say, a private company that there may be some concerns with, say, an oil producer or something of that nature. So we don't invest in those types of investments anyway. So General Manager Johnson did send out a memo to the full board approximately a month ago explaining those findings. So I just wanted to point that out, that we did look into that potentiality and really doesn't apply in RTD's case. So what I would like to point out, at least in this policy document, there's only a few small changes, and those really have to do with the reporting requirements. Within the policy, we have previously had very specific reporting requirements that probably no longer apply. And I say that because one of the reporting requirements revolved around the exact reporting on an annual basis within 120 days, the exact investment makeup. That's not necessarily a problem. We can still provide that information, but it would change. It can change literally on a daily basis. So to provide that at one point in time isn't necessarily instructive. However, we can provide that at any time. So we removed that language and suggested that we will continue to report our investment makeup as we do in our annual comprehensive financial report. That is audited by our auditors, and I think it's actually a better document to review, because most of these fixed income investments, particularly bonds, don't necessarily have a market price, so they go through a very close audit process. So we would continue to provide that information in the annual comprehensive financial report. As well, we also staff also provides a quarterly investment report with the investment makeup, as well as the investment returns. Those are provided to the board through the board briefings. So we are really just attempting in that red line version to clarify some of that language, what our current practice is and what we've been doing for several years. Brendan, anything to add?
Thank you, Doug. I think you covered it all quite well. I would highlight that I do believe the policy is a very prudent investment program that this policy lays out, and I think Doug presented it well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes our comments. Be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and open up for questions and discussion. Dr. Deschel, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's more discussion. I want to thank Brendan and Doug Laton as well for taking time to be with Director Lewis and I on ESG, the ESG world. I know you mentioned that it wouldn't, a lot of those ESG policies likely really wouldn't apply here because we're not taking equity positions, but we can take a 40% commercial paper position with no more than 3% in one, to call it, if we maxed out 10 to 15 commercial papers. Did you have the same analysis there? Because isn't that effectively, it's not an equity position, but it's effectively loaning a company or buying the debt.
Brendan, would you care to comment on that, please?
Sure, Doug. Yeah, Director Deschel, you're absolutely right. So the policy does allow for up to 40% to be invested in commercial paper, limiting it to the diversification requirement of maximum 3% per issuer. And I guess if we want to go further, there's also an allowance for corporate bonds of up to, I believe it's 20%, again, with further diversification requirements. So it's certainly possible that the portfolio could be set up that way. If you were to look at our portfolio today, just hypothetically, just looking at what it looks like today, if we're looking at our unrestricted funds, we do have a couple corporate bonds. They are with BlackRock, who's a financial services firm, and Apple Computers, the other one. And that's it. And they combined make up less than 1% of the portfolio. But you're absolutely right about the potential.
And I would say, BlackRock has made a lot of headlines for their specific, explicit ESG investment policy. So to the extent we're already investing with them on commercial paper, maybe looking, would ask that you guys maybe consider looking at, does a BlackRock type policy for commercial paper and corporate bonds make sense? And what would the trade-offs be? Doesn't need an answer right now, but I think just some food for thought as long as we're investing in commercial paper and corporate bonds, and we're investing in companies that are responsible already and have made those commitments. Does it make sense for us to have those same commitments too?
Thank you for the comments, Director Deschel. Appreciate it. Mr. Morgan, any reactions, any response to any of that?
No, I think it's a fantastic question. I will say that the one of the other requirements of the policy is the credit quality requirement. So with the bonds needs to be AA or better. So it's a very limited world of corporate bonds that are still AA or better rated that actually have securities outstanding that fall within our policy guidelines. So for the most part, it doesn't tend to be a huge issue because there's not a whole lot of bonds that we can buy or commercial paper that we can buy that fall within the credit requirements. And beyond that, there's the maturity restrictions. The corporate bonds, we're not buying very long-term investments, typically 1 to 3 years in that range at the most. And we only buy them when they pay us a significant premium above and beyond what we could earn by buying US treasuries or agencies, things like that, or even municipal bonds. We do buy tax-exempt municipal bonds from time to time when they have a good spread above treasuries that pay RTD well. So we don't jump right at them. That's, as you see, we only have a couple in the portfolio right now. And that is how we tend to operate. But your message is well received.
Thank you for the follow-up comments. Appreciate it. And thank you for the deep dive on this. Any further questions, discussion? All right. Mr. Morgan, while we have you, I just would like to thank you for your management of our investments in debt. And we're going to get to see some of the budget this evening, and no small task with our debt. And things are going quite well right now. So I know not related to this action, but just while we got you, thank you.
Thank you.
So with no further discussion on the item here, I will go ahead and call for the vote. Are there any no votes on the motion? Being none, it will pass unanimously with 7 ayes, 0 noes. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Now we will move to our discussion items for the evening. We have 2 discussion items. I think they're both hot topics for us. So the first is the call for projects in the partnership program update. And at this time, I'll go ahead and ask Mr. Brian Welch, our Acting Assistant General Manager of Planning, and Mr. Bill Saroy, Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Communities, to please present this item.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair and committee members. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because we have a PowerPoint presentation to walk through. I will begin and then turn it over to Mr. Saroy, who will assist me. Is this looking okay to everyone?
Looks great.
Okay. Overview of what we'll present tonight. After walking through this, we'll give ample time for director questions. We've answered a handful so far that have been shared with you, but please feel free. We're excited about presenting this tonight. The structure that we're moving forward with at RTD started actually a long time ago. Partnerships, while they're very much part of our conversation in the last 2 or 3 years, they're not new. The board has a policy actually adopted all the way back in 1994. It's an inward-facing policy that addresses some of the considerations that would be part of a partnership program, but it was not intended in its form at that time to be a welcoming, outwardly focused effort, which is what is the focus of where we are right now. This gives you a sense of the context that we're working in. The strategic plan, Reimagine RTD, Mobility Choice Blueprint, and the Accountability Committee all have brought up this issue. And I know that not a single director has not heard about this multiple times over the last 2 or 3 years. So we're excited to move forward at this time. We have 3 things that we're calling a partnership for the purposes of this discussion. And I want to clarify that a question came up from a couple of directors regarding bus stops. This would not be the forum by which we would consider requests, for example, for bus stops or any capital investment. Those require a much different approach than what we envision for the partnership program. We continue, of course, to be interested in those types of opportunities, but this is cost sharing, mobility pilots, and third-party operations. We've included in the material a succinct summary of partnerships that are currently underway at RTD, and I won't read all these to you, but they, as you can see, they date back. There's one that's dated here 1993, and they run all the way through the most recent ones, which include, you're all familiar with what we've been doing, very recently in some of our partnership efforts as well. The current expenditures are approximately $5.2 million per year. What I've shown here, just for reference purposes, Bill Sirois will talk more about this, but we wanted to give you we just in these two slides referenced subregions. So this is just a quick reminder to you of what these travel shed subregions are. And as I indicated, Bill Sirois will give a more detailed description of how we're moving forward and what the linkage is between sub-regional service councils and the Call for Projects Partnership Program. The cost-sharing policy that I referred to earlier has not been substantially changed really at all formally or informally since it was originally adopted by the board in 1994. If you go back and look at it, it has 4 primary features that are articulated, and while some of them are still relevant, in many cases they do need to be refreshed and brought up to the context by which we're working right now. The partnership policy that we're moving forward with, that we wanted to update the board on this evening, includes a number of highlights that will be articulated a little bit more, but in essence, what we're achieving to do and endeavoring to do with our stakeholders is have a front door. We get these requests fairly consistently throughout the year. I wanted to just mention quickly that Erin Vallejos, who's key to this effort at RTD, she's also present tonight, and Charlie Stanfield, who's been helping as well. And we may want to call on them too, depending upon the nature of the inquiry. But at any rate, we would like to have a process by which people understand better, how do I interact with RTD? How do I become a partner? What are the rules going to be? How much money do you have? How would that work? It's this notion of stakeholder clarity. And as you can imagine, we are predicating these on board adopted guiding principles from Reimagine RTD. And very early on, when the board did adopt those, you identified partnerships as a key part, and it has come up consistently as one of our paths forward to satisfy the needs of a very diverse district. We often refer to the size of our district being similar to the size of one of the states in the United States. Well, it's also got an extremely, in the planning jargon, we call it the transect. So you have everything from the Denver CBD with skyscrapers going all the way out to Lyons and up to Rocky Mountain National Park and everything in between. And one size does not fit all, and partnerships are definitely part of our future. The goals would be summarized here. You're familiar with these because these have been raised many, many times by our stakeholders. As you can see, one of the bullets is to prioritize equity populations and the equity lens that we have employed consistently at RTD. The framework highlights include a dedicated position partnership lead within contracted services. You know about our people problems, and taking on additional partnerships and doing it right requires a robust support. We have heard from our stakeholders that RTD, hey, we need some technical help. Can you help us through this? Do you have time to walk us through some of the complicated issues related to civil rights and Americans with Disability Act and Buy America and federal money? And we certainly do, and we want to have sufficient staff support to make it a program that is robust and reliable. We also have asked the board to set aside money starting next year. that would provide an incremental amount above the $5.2 million that you currently supply. Now, with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Mr. Siroy, who's going to talk a bit about how the sub-regional service councils are part and parcel of our proposed approach. So, Bill, I'm going to go to the next slide, and you just tell me how you'd like me to proceed.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Thank you, board members, for listening in here. You know, one of the things with the service councils is talking about allocation. We're looking at this as kind of not a region-wide competition. What do we mean by that? I think we mean that, you know, we don't expect any one of the 5 service councils to get the majority of the funds. I think there's got to be a distribution system in place that allows kind of more, you know, even distribution or distribution by some metric, and we have some of those listed here, so that we can, you know, make sure that no one gets kind of over and above the allocation that, you know, we think is right. So one of the ways that we propose to leverage these, one of the things that we've talked about is to use this more like what DRCOG does for their regional transportation forums they do related to the Transportation Improvement Program, where there would be, you know, a conversation or discussion at the sub-regional service council level about what projects should be submitted, and then they come to an agreement on that. So those are some of the kind of, in terms of the allocation, some of the thoughts that we have. Again, these are not fully defined at this point, and we'd love to get some feedback from the board on this. Next slide, Brian. And just as a reminder, and Brian highlighted this earlier, this is a map of the sub-regional service councils as we have them defined. Just a little bit of an update. We have sent out requests for representatives from the entities within these different sub-regions. We have meetings scheduled for the first half of November. So we're well on our way to kind of starting this process off. Next slide. And this is a little bit, I think we've shown this slide before to the board, or a version of this slide, I think when we went to the board in June, relating to kind of who we expect to be in the different service councils. You know, one of the areas that I think that we haven't defined yet, and we do want to kind of get some help from some of the jurisdictions and the other stakeholders in these service councils, is non-governmental agencies and nonprofits that really represent our customer base. So that's something that we're going to be doing at the first meeting that we have in November. But this gives you some sense of, you know, who's on these, kind of in a little bit of information and metrics about the size of the service councils and kind of how they relate to transit usage. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Brian. But I like I said, we're kicking off this service council process, and one of the things that we do plan to do at the first service council is get feedback on this program. So we will be having that as an agenda item to talk with the service council representatives about kind of this program before we kind of bring anything back fully baked to the board. Thank you.
I have 3 slides left, and this gives you a sense of the broad picture workflow. Notice that the SSC, that's the first step that would occur as part of this program. We haven't identified this as necessarily January 2023, but we view this as a good look at what the program would look like on an annual basis. So these would flow through similar to other grant type programs. We won't go into a lot of detail right now, but if you have any questions on this, it's intended to be something where we would anticipate that the board would be aware of what's going on an annual basis, and then we would have projects that would say maybe last 1, 2, 3 years probably, and then you would roll in new ones over time. But this cycle of the flow would continue on a year-to-year basis. The performance metrics are something that are under development right now. As you know, the service standards that were associated prior to the onset of the Pandemic 20 Run Board have been not as useful. Let's put it that way, because of the nature of the changes that have occurred. But we will be working on performance metrics that would be appropriate for this part of our family of services, which is the community category. We recognize that obviously aligning with the strategic plan, the importance of transit-dependent customers, there also needs to be an art and a science to this. If we strictly held to a numeric, let's say boardings per revenue hour or cost per boarding, it might not really reflect the intent and what the board's outcomes would be desired for one of these partnerships in the first place. So more to come. That's a work in progress. The way we're envisioning this, and this is how we've approached partnerships over the years, is that we understand that some of these particularly innovative partnerships, they need time, and you can't pull the plug on them prematurely. So they would need time to play themselves out. Any new transit service has to generally be evaluated in years, not in months. It just, unless it's a partnership like 61AV, where you're testing a vehicle and doing proof of concept, most of these are going to require more time than that. And we're going to want to give partners the opportunity to perhaps make adjustments. Maybe we'll see that the partnership isn't achieving what we initially thought, but we do want to have the opportunity to give these a chance to prove themselves and not prematurely end them before they've had a chance really to get their legs. So that's the end of the presentation that we have. So I will stop my screen share right here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present the program to you.
Great. Mr. Welch, Mr. Soroy, thank you so much for presenting that. It's exciting stuff. Great to see this coming together. I know something we all hear a lot about. Open up for discussions and discussion and questions, starting with Director Deschel.
Yeah. Does the Boulder Subservice Council have a particularly high equity population or equity need?
This is Bill Sorrell. I'll take that. You know, we in our evaluation and reimagine, it didn't have one of the higher ones. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it didn't have one of the higher ones. So yeah, I don't exactly remember what it was, but I know it wasn't on the higher side.
Well, so I say that to go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much, Director Deschel. I would say in order for us to better answer your question, we can circle back and get that specific information, because I want to ensure that everybody has the same information and we're not conjecturing or speculating about what that is.
Yeah, and the reason why I ask is, you know, focusing on equity might mean that certain populations get what they need, meaning they get more than they would otherwise get. So when I look at equality, as I see that 11% of the population, or 11% of the numbers that were shown, are receiving over 60% of the partnership funds. When you deduct out the district-wide services, the Boulder Subservice Council and the Northwest area receive over 60%. You take out the 280 grand, you're still north of 50%. So unless there's a particularly high equity need in Boulder, which would justify 10% of the population or 11% of the population getting over 60% of the partnership dollars, I'm curious how we're going to sort of right size that and really focus on equity going forward more than just a line on the slide.
Well, if I may, I can start.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Director Davidson. We believe that moving forward, what we'd like the board to reflect on is two parts that we could emphasize equity. One would be, first of all, when the sub-regional service councils make their proposals, that we've heard this and we're considering this, how we could mathematically, qualitatively, quantitatively assess the equity populations that would be served and make that part of the decision on how much money would be allocated at the first round. And then in addition to that, we've also thought about in the local match percentage, which we're hovering around. We're thinking it would be similar to DRCOG, which is usually about 20%, that we might want to scale that. In fact, if it's an equity population that would be served, and we would lower the amount of local match that would be required, and perhaps finally give more points if it was appropriate. If there is more demands for the money than money available to score those higher, the extent to which they serve an equity population. So we do believe there's a way to introduce an equity lens as we move forward with the new money that would be available.
Thank you. So just to ask a clarifying question, are all of the current partnerships sort of locked in, guaranteed, or are we saying, hey, clean slate, there's X million dollars, this is our new process, everyone's going to need to apply? Or do we know? If it's we haven't decided yet, that's totally fine. I'm trying to gauge.
Ms. Johnson, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Director Davidson, and thank you very much, Director Deschel, for the question. Recognizing some of these services have been in existence, we're going to be, intentional as we go forward, because it's our mission to deliver service and make lives better through connection. So I don't want to cut off our noses to spite our faces when we do this. So we will be having discussions holistically with the sub-regional service councils, because we want them to be part of this. And as we make that decision going forward, perhaps there may be another project that's more beneficial. So I think it's incumbent upon us not to make a unilateral decision, but assess what might be beneficial for the areas in which we provide services to.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, Director Deschel, Ms. Johnson, Mr. Welch. In the interest of just a little privilege here, just because it's related, I guess along the lines of what Director Deschel is asking about, a question I have as we evaluate previous partnerships and then partnerships going forward, I see the cost to RTD, but I'm curious about the contribution from the partner, both current and going forward. Do we have that data for current partnerships?
Yes, we do, and we can share that with you.
Okay, I appreciate that. And Ms. Johnson, as we look at this, as you said, holistically and recognizing the past and then where we go from here, I think it would be good to start, looking at those as we report the partnerships to the board. Thank you very much. Director Broom, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I had a question. If you're modeling this somewhat after the way DRCOG allocates funds, do you think you're going to have some kind of a TAC organization that's going to review all of the requests and score those requests and then pass that information onto the board? And then what's the criteria for getting points? Is it first and last mile type operations or affordable housing? I mean, I don't know exactly what we're trying to accomplish with this.
If I may,
please.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Director Broom. What we envision is that the sub-regional service councils would be very important in identifying together at their sub-region what they believe to be the projects that align the best with the guiding principles and the criteria. We will have a series of questions that will be filled out, for example, when one of them applies, and we would imagine that they would have worked together prior to proposing their projects to decide upon, for our region, this is what we propose, and it's our understanding that these are going to meet the criteria by which RTD has set them up. I would imagine that given the need to move this program forward expeditiously, we won't have a sophisticated calculation methodology or point scoring in the manner in which DRCOG would do it, Director Broom, but it would be a formal process that would ensure that any proposed project that comes from a sub-regional service council would have merit based upon a clearly defined set of criteria. If we get into a situation where there are more projects requested than we have sufficient funds, we could go in a number of different directions. One would be in another cycle to request additional funding from the board if they all have merit, and that would be your decision, of course. Or we could scale them and make an attempt to sequence them in a manner. But we're going for an approach that would be simple and straightforward and understandable to the stakeholder and very transparent in terms of laying out for them, if you follow these steps and if you can demonstrate that you have met a certain set of criteria that we have defined for what makes a successful project, you would have the best opportunity to move forward. And I think what's different about this approach perhaps is that we're looking to the sub-regional service councils rather than the district in this case to dictate more of what they believe to be meeting their needs. And we've heard that consistently from our stakeholders, from you directors repeatedly, that let us have the opportunity to work alongside you to craft different approaches. And I think we want to have a perhaps more flexible approach in this particular program, and frankly, get more projects through the door and find ways to get more of these up and running rather than ways to say, no, we want to find more ways to say yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Director Whitmore, please.
Well, I almost interrupted to give an amen to Brian's last statement. I appreciate that immensely. I always appreciate Bill and Brian's enthusiasm and their innovation. So, Director Geisinger, I hope to prompt a nodding of the head, but this harkens back to months of work with the Accountability Committee and the relationship with partnerships. But I truly appreciate the linkage to the service councils and the ability to look for those grassroots kind of solutions that we hear about as staff members and certainly as board members. So I'm very pleased to see this evolving, and I know it's more of an art than a science in many ways. One thing that we do have to always remember is a partnership is just that. It's not just RTD throwing money at a project. It's relationship building and trust building to procure the local agencies or the local governments to provide some of the money for these programs. So that I think tends to shape some of the issues of imbalances from time to time that we certainly want to be wary of. But I really appreciate this being a tremendous step for the future and turning us away from the old moniker that some of us inherited when we came on board of being the agency of no. Let's find that yes. So again, thanks Brian and Bill. That's all.
Thank you, Director Whitmore. Well said. Appreciate it. Director Geisinger, please.
Thank you very much. And I agree in terms of wanting to say amen, Brian, when I hear you say we want to get to yes, we want to be flexible. Those are critical pieces for me. And I think, in terms of Director Davidson's question that maybe in this presentation, as you move it forward to other people, there's a lot more to it than just what we are paying. And one piece of that is what's the other partner paying? And I think I would love to see us be able to have the flexibility to say, oh, this group is coming in with a proposal that may not meet every service standard or every whatever, but they're offering to bring their own provider with their own workforce. It takes a huge load off of us. Our goal, as you've said, is to expand transit. And so if we get too down in the weeds of it didn't meet this requirement or that requirement, I think, we start to run into a problem. Another comment I have is I talked with somebody at the city of Boulder today, and he pointed out that y'all have been working on this gun barrel shuttle, which does serve equity populations. And I know Ms. Johnson came out and checked out what the proposal was. It's a route that we eliminated, but it still serves a lot of people, a lot of essential workers and others. There will be other towns and other groups in the district that won't have the capacity to fully plan it, all the service hours, all the you know, the schedule that I think is being done on this kind of project. So it may be that we have to be open to taking on some more of that. I don't know if that's something you've considered for, you know, smaller places and places that aren't as used to coming in looking for partnerships. Have we set an amount of money? Have you got a proposal for us on that?
Jim, CEO Johnson, did you want to respond to that?
I wanted to thank you very much, Director Davidson and Director Geisinger, for the question. I just wanted to provide some insight as it relates to what it is that we're trying to do collectively, because recognizing that everybody has people power problems. So we have to think about the pool and the source of resources, because they're all coming from the same place, especially in our limited metropolitan area, because there's not a large, I'd say, talent pool in relationship to transportation service delivery. So with that as a backdrop, as we go forward, and I just forgot my thought.
It happens.
Oh my goodness. Whoa. Okay. It'll come back. Can you repeat your question again, Director Geisinger?
Well, I was talking generally. I think maybe you put your hand up when I was talking about the fact that can we consider other factors?
Oh yes, I know exactly what I was going to say. Thank you. So recognizing the investment we're making here collectively as we truly want to be partners, one aspect of this program is for us to have dedicated staff to assist with this, because what we've been doing here at the agency is having this cross matrix team working on this, and to be consistent is have an individual shepherd this. And so I think that'll be key to the point that you raised, Director Geisinger, about, you know, a city may not have the resources and they may need to look to us because we have that subject matter expertise as we go forward. And I see Ms. Beos has come on screen because she has been shepherding this along with her other responsibilities. So I just wanted to ensure that everybody had an understanding of what that may mean. And as we talk about, you know, the monies that we're allocating and so forth, to the point that Mr. Welch had broached, the agency is already paying $5.2 million for the current projects that we have, and going forward, we're looking at the allocation around $2 million. We want to ensure that it's scalable as we go full circle in reference to having enough resources to make good on what we're trying to put forward and then build upon that.
Did you say 2 million?
Yes.
Oh, I thought the discussion was around 1% of the budget or something, if we decided to bring that down.
Mr. McLeod, pursuant to our budget discussion, is that correct?
Yes, correct. $2 million is what we have as a placeholder. And certainly, you know, we'll talk about the budget a little bit. We remain agile to adjust certain numbers to what the board decides in terms of needs.
Well, I guess I would make the comment that, you know, if we're making these welcoming and hoping not to say no and to say yes, that we need to have more money allocated, I would propose that we, you know, look at a bigger number. That doesn't seem like it sounds to me like we're going to be saying no to a lot of people. So, you know, I guess we can raise that when the time is right.
I may, Director Geisinger, recognizing that the elements that we will be discussing, not everything will be the same. It's contingent upon the area and what people need. So when you think about the cost of deploying some kind of jitney, you know, trying to get people to an activity center where folks need to go, that may not be the same cost as another type of mobility service. So when we look at this, that gets back to the flexibility and agility. There's going to be different, it's going to be scalable and different types of mobility services, because I know oftentimes somebody sees something and they may want an articulated vehicle, but in some of these areas that may not be the most prudent course of transport for that area. So I say all that to say that we're going to be flexible and agile, and that's why I was working with Mr. McLeod as we go forward, and we want to get the input of the service council, so we have an understanding of what that is, so we're not just coming up with some arbitrary, number. So,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know if Brian wants to respond. to
Yeah,
that.
Director Geisinger, just to close off that question, the 1%, 2% numbers have come up, and we've heard that a number of times. We would view the $2 million as our initial, and it was predicated on 4 $500,000 RTD partnerships in the first year. So we do look at this as scalable for sure, but we wanted to set the expectations reasonably, at least at the outset. But I would concur, and should it be the board's purview, the project can scale over time. And I think that it's entirely reasonable that we would go from 5.2 to the $2 million more. Should these things prove to be successful, which I think they are going to be, that's when we could start approaching perhaps that 1% target, should it be within the board's discretion to do that. So look at $2 million as the initial target for the first year of this effort, with the aspiration to perhaps get closer to that 1%.
Okay, I guess it's a question that'll come to the board, but my view would be, if we're making this welcoming, I mean, to me, these are our future. We can't provide the kind of service that people are wanting without putting together these partnerships. And this is a way of bringing income into the agency and also saving money. So I guess, I will think about it and talk to people, but I think that we need to start with a bigger number to be welcoming. Another piece to consider, I assume that the Uber pilot, since we're just paying the customer pays the first $2 and then we pay the next 20. I haven't heard specifics, but I assume that's saving us money. And some of these partnerships have other benefits in terms of expanding our ridership, saving us money at lower cost to us. So I think that those are important pieces in addition to what it's costing for us. And finally, I will mention, the HOP, because Director Deschel, Boulder doesn't get 60% of the money unless you consider the HOP. And the HOP's been a partnership since 1993. It's critical for other RTD's other transit to work well because it moves people around through the network. And while RTD is spending $1.3 million right now, the city is spending $3.1 million. The university is spending, I think, $350,000 plus something like $7 million in EcoPass and student passes. That probably was a pre-pandemic number. So just to clarify that's, sort of a different animal that still brings a lot of benefit to the agency at a much lower cost than we could be providing it ourselves. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. Thank you for the discussion on everybody on that. I will go ahead and move to the next hand, which is Director Cook.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the presentation. I would echo what folks are saying about the flexibility, and I appreciate the fact that we're adopting a structure, a framework that's similar to what DRCOG has done with the sub-regional stuff. And I wanted to check because a memo that we saw from GM CEO Johnson, Ms. Johnson, talked about bringing a detailed application for the partnerships to the sub-regional service councils in November. Will they have a chance to weigh in so as to influence that application, pieces of that? I mean, tell me a little bit about your plan for that, Brian.
If I may, I'll start, and then Bill, if you'd like to supplement, please do. It's our intent that following this meeting and incorporating the board comments, we're going to produce a version of this PowerPoint, but it will have more detail about some of the specifics that you have all brought up. What's the local match percentage? What's the criteria going to look like in terms of how we're going to allocate the money? what the flow chart looks like so they can see how these projects flow through the agency. Finally, probably most importantly, is we've developed a draft of a project intake form, and it will be very clear to each applicant, oh, okay, I see what I have to do. I see what you're going to need. I see what kind of metrics you're going to be looking at. What we want to do and what we promised to the stakeholders during the process is we're going to show that to you. What do you think? Does this look doable to you? Do these questions seem reasonable? Do you think this is going to fit the type of project? And we're looking forward to that process in November, because that will inform the method by which we move forward. So, Bill, would you like to add anything to that?
No, just to reiterate what Brian, this is going to be a major agenda item for those first meetings. And, we're looking for direct feedback from the service councils on this proposal.
And so the answer is yes. The stakeholders at the sub-regional service councils are going to give us feedback, and we're going to take it seriously and make sure that they are comfortable with an approach that's focused on their input, that it is acknowledged that we did listen to their input from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's good. We look to these partnerships as a way to expand service, and you got to bear in mind that these folks are coming to the table with money. They're not getting fully funded services as other parts of the district are. So I think that underscores an argument for flexibility, to allow them to tailor things, to bring new ideas forward, and for us to be able to see how that works. And, maybe it helps our operations as well, as vice versa. And I am worried that, boy, we kind of set expectations in the working group and the advisory committee by talking about a 1%. And I'm really worried that we're scaling it down so much that you may be able to fund 1, maybe 2 or something, in each sub area, and it will dampen the interest and enthusiasm that they may have. Are there, what changed between that meeting and now? Have we, tell me why we've gone from 1%, which would have been 7 or 8 million, if I recall, down to this 2 million. What's different between those meetings and now?
May I respond? I'll start, and then GM CEO Johnson, please supplement, and Mark maybe direct me. The consultant team initially identified an aspirational target of 1%, and that's where that came from. We recognized at the staff level, and that their recommendation was predicated on their understanding of the importance of the program and some national research that they had done. What we tempered that with was our staffing and our people power and our ability to carry out the first year successfully. But I'll just turn it over now to GM CEO Johnson. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Welch. Director Cook, thank you for the question. And I was just going to state the same thing. It really has to do with resources. We don't want to overpromise. We basically don't have the staff support that we would need holistically, because we still have vacancies in every single department. And so if there's an expectation where we have to provide support as we look at, team members in our civil rights office, as we look at, equity, ADA, and the myriad of issues that Brian and Bill Shorey touched upon earlier. And as I said, as well as we look at our other contracted services, we have Ms. Theos here, who has been understaffed, and she's taking care of a myriad of different aspects of contracted services. So that's what it boils down to. That's why we talked about the scalability as we go forward, and recognizing that we are in a tight labor market. We still need somebody to manage this program. And so I want to be judicious as we go forward. So that's the rationale behind that. And yes, the consultant team presented that. And in the interest of full disclosure, I learned about that 1% that was put forward. I had no understanding that's what they were showcasing to individuals, and whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, I'm just being very transparent.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks. One last thing. I'm now going to recall my limited experience as a startup doing one of these contracts. I mean, doing one of these services with RTD. Is there a way through some kind of in-kind support that we can actually broaden the help that we provide, actually increase the the resources that we make available. And I'm thinking of the things that cost us a lot, especially at the outset. It was really tough to get insurance as a startup nonprofit doing transportation. And for the first few years, we paid a whole lot. So I don't know if there's some model we could support that would allow people to tap as a pool. And insurance, you know what I mean, sort of like risk management agencies will do. They'll band together as a pool and then get better rates on insurance. I don't know. I'm just tossing out ideas. Another one was we were fortunate enough to have been able to work out an arrangement with MV Transportation, who had training going on up at Broomfield at the Flatirons Crossing Mall. And we were able to do all of our initial training for a year or two by paying them an amount to get into their classroom training for the operators, for the drivers. So I would just want to encourage us to think in creative ways that we may be able to help agencies that aren't in the transportation business to get up on their feet on it, and without costing us a lot of money that way. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Deschel, for the comments and input on there. I'll move to Director Deschel, please.
Thanks, Director Davidson. Just a few quick comments and thoughts and responses of what's been going on. I think, one thing, a challenge that I know Boulder and the Broomfield area, to the extent that the office parks are rehabilitated, and Cherry Creek all face are that they are census tracts that are non-equity populations, but there are many people who are low income, who may be protected class, who need to go work there. And I think as we think about equity, thinking about job and labor force and where people have jobs and where they need to go is critical. And I think is something that is often overlooked in fairness to various jurisdictions. I think I don't envy the challenge of figuring that one out, especially as we navigate federal guidelines as well. But just want to pose that as an equity consideration, which is that people actually also need to leave their house and go somewhere. And oftentimes that's to a higher wealth census tract. I think the other thing to think about is legacy partnerships and equity. While it's true the HOP provides a great service, I used it when I was a student in Boulder. It does provide great connector service. It's also important to think about equity from who had access to provide that input, who had access and ability to lobby for that to exist, right? And so to say, well, of course, it's been there for forever. Legacy systems in many cases are inherently inequitable because of those who did or did not have a seat at the table. Which is not to paint HOP or any of our other services from the 90s in a negative light, but just to say that maybe not everyone was there to give that voice to advocate for their community in the same way as other communities. So I think using things like legacy and tradition, it's really important to even view those through an even tighter lens, because oftentimes as we're working to dismantle power and dismantle those who had it, it's those legacy systems, it's those traditions that we really need to examine as we think through equity. So I just wanted to offer those up as some thoughts. And I think finally, I think I agree with the $2 million reduction. I think it'd be great to see some sort of, hey, if we hired an extra person, we could expand the pool. Because the reality is, I think if any of us were told, today's October 11th, and we're rolling out a new program January 1st, you're supposed to manage a $2 million grant program, and that person doesn't exist, that person hasn't been hired yet. That's a tough job to walk in on January 1st or possibly February 1st. If you operate on the assumption that no one's gotten hired, that means that Bill and Brian and their teams and Aaron are stretched even thinner than they already are. And if you are hiring someone new, it means they are coming in at best November 1st, December 1st, and have less than 90 days to ramp up for a brand new $2 million program that hasn't existed before, including managing 5 new self-service councils that hasn't existed before. So I say that to say thank you to our staff who have been working overtime and working multiple jobs and wearing multiple hats, and also to sort of maybe put it in perspective for folks of what that would mean for any of us. Because I think if we said, hey, the floodgates are open, $10 million available for partnership, plus the $5 million already existing, we do just as bad at, could be an even worse outcome by not being fully prepared.
Thank you, Director Deschel, for the comments. I think a lot of good thinking in there, and I think all the more reason as we go through this program, we want to look carefully at all the numbers, all the criteria, and how we evaluate these. And thank you to everybody for the comments. And Director Deschel, thank you for mentioning the how people get to and fro and where they go. That's something that I think we're even more acutely aware of in the new normal after the pandemic. There are some lines that I know have often been looked at, commuter lines, but they've changed quite a bit. And it's one of the questions that I've gotten from folks that are in the business community, specifically in service industries, has been questions around plans for how people get to and from their place of business in a time when they're staff constrained and in a challenging land use environment. So anyway, thank you for highlighting that. Any other questions or discussion regarding the presentation? Well, thank you very much to the whole team. This is it's a lot of work. It's exciting to see some things coming together here. So really appreciate it, especially given how stretched thin everybody is right now. Certainly appreciate the situation. Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead. We'll be moving forward at the agenda. I am going to go ahead and say that I would like us to take a very brief break here because I want everyone to be fresh and restroom breaks and so forth for the budget discussion. So my apologies for postponing things a little bit here. Hopefully folks can use the break. Let's make it pretty quick. We'll do 4 minutes. We'll be back at 5 after sharp. We'll restart everything at 8:05 p.m. Thank you very much. See you shortly. Come back in 1 minute. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So hopefully everybody is back. Thanks for taking the break. I know we're getting close here. I see cameras coming back on. That's good. Thanks, everybody. All right, so we're going to go to our final discussion item, which is the 2023 proposed budget. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Mr. Doug McLeod, Chief Financial Officer, and Mr. Todd Nickel, our Senior Manager of Budget, to please present the discussion item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a presentation that I'll go through, and Todd will help me field questions. But I would like to point out that in the board package, the committee package, in addition to this presentation, there is a more detailed budget document which provides additional color that I won't go through every point within there, and some additional tables and charts, but intend to hit mainly on the highlights since this is a discussion item. So I will share my screen. Okay, so this is the 2023 proposed budget. We bring the budget forward for board consideration in the fall of each year. Typically in the past, we've done an amended budget. I think probably the board has recognized that we haven't brought as many budget transfers over the past year or two, and we've really tried to cut down on that. And General Manager Johnson's direction is really, we want to try to budget much more accurately to avoid possibly even an amended budget, but also budget transfers. So we feel that we're in a good place with this budget. At this point, we do have some further adjustments before bringing an action item to the board in November. So the timing of this budget generally, well, for this period is really to bring this as a discussion item to this finance committee, then bring it to the board later this month as a discussion item. Then we would come back to the finance committee on November 1st with a proposed budget that would lay out what staff is requesting as basically a final budget going into 2023, seeking the board approval. That intervening period is really intended for two purposes. One is statutory requirements require that governmental agencies post their budget for public inspection by October 15th of each year. So as a result of that, we will be posting this draft budget in the board office. We will also provide a banner on the RTD website with a link to these budget documents, and it will also be a notice will go out in two daily papers, the Denver Post and the Boulder Daily Camera. So we're trying to make it as available as possible to the public to receive any feedback from not only the board, but also our constituents. So in developing the budget, we went through basically the same process that we've gone through in past years. However, it's been a little bit more detailed. Timelines are we always go through a period of where, it's always last minute making certain decisions, but it was a very collaborative effort. We start the budget preparation at the AGM and department levels and chief levels. They develop their budgets. Then we bring it all together, pull all this information together within our software and have meetings with General Manager Johnson and go through those. So that's pretty much the budget development process. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of changes that go on throughout that process. And one of the big intentions, and when we set targets for the departments when they start developing their budgets, is really to target from a financial perspective the MTF the midterm financial plan. So back in September, the board approved the 2023 through 2028 midterm financial plan. That pretty much set the expenditure targets based on our outlook for the next 6 years of what was deemed to be affordable. Of course, there's many other aspects that go into a budget development, funding being just one of them, but that's our starting point. So we used the midterm financial plan, operating expenditures, capital expenditures, and state of good repair expenditures as the target to put these numbers together. I would like to point out too that we've been working towards alignment with our strategic plan with a focus on a system optimization plan, people power, and our fiscal policy. So as we develop this budget, it's really critical that we look at our strategic priorities and align the budget funding. I think in past years, especially when we had budgetary constraints, it was flipped the other way to where we basically put together our plan based on our budgetary constraints. That's really the wrong way to go about that. We really want to align our budget with our strategic direction. And there's been several discussions this evening about scalability. And that's the intent, is that we would scale things accordingly and prioritize certain initiatives. Some of the assumptions that I think are important for the budget, many years they're important, but this year in particular, there's certain items that are different than other years. Ridership and fare alignment to trend. So now that we've somewhat emerged from COVID and seen more of a steady trend in terms of our ridership, we recognize that in 2022, we had budgeted additional ridership that didn't actually return. Part of that, the biggest part of that was not knowing when we put together the budget in late 2021. Still a lot of volatility in our ridership, a lot of uncertainty. Some of the employers were just requiring return to work. Schools still had some outstanding issues in terms of remote work versus on-site. So there's a lot of uncertainty. We have a better idea of pretty much our trends at this point in time. We've also looked at several reports. Standard & Poor's put out another report and mentioned that their previous report about a year ago said that they expected public transit to recover eventually to an 85% of pre-COVID level in terms of ridership. They've redone that estimation, and now they're saying up to 70% over the next several years. So still a lot of uncertainty there, and they've backed off a little bit on their projections.
Hey,
Also
Doug, sorry to interrupt you. I see Director Catlin's hands up, but I think I know what it might be. The slides aren't changing. I just noticed this as I'm following along in our packet here, but we're still on slide 2. There we go.
Thank you. Sorry, I've actually got it on two screens, so thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry
Thank you
for
very much.
interrupting.
So I'm on the third bullet here, really talking about our alignment. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong page still. On the fourth slide, talking about ridership and fare alignment trends. So we've really tried to align our ridership and fares accordingly. You may remember the discussion that we had in the midterm financial plan that longer term, we're actually talking about bringing down our average fare per rider, just based on certain assumptions and to be conservative with the midterm financial plan, or the fare study and equity analysis direction that we've gotten from public feedback. However, within 2023, we haven't adjusted the actual average fare per rider. We've just adjusted the ridership back to what our trend is. So what you'll see when we get to the cash flow statement on the last slide is that there will be some decrease in fare revenue. Sales and use tax is our largest source of revenue. We're using the CU Leads forecast that was reviewed with the board during September. That does reflect an increase of approximately 22 million over the March forecast for the year of 2023. So we are expecting an increase. Still, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges we may face, which is touched upon in the next bullet. Higher inflation and supply chain constraints. So we've been experiencing supply chain constraints for well over a year now. And it appears that some of those problems, depending on what type of product you're looking at, is more exacerbated at this point in time and very uncertain as far as the future goes. So a lot of our discussions have been around projects, and as we determine which projects fit within the strategic priorities, what's the timing for that? What's the lead time? We have people power issues, of course, but also the actual products that are necessary to make those projects happen. So there's a lot of uncertainty there with higher inflation, supply chain constraints. Asset management, we think we've got a fairly good hold on that in terms of what the needs are. That was reflected in the midterm financial plan as well. On average, we anticipate expending approximately $120 million per year. That will go up and down because of the different sizings of the projects and the timing of the needs. And what we're doing is when we have additional cash flow, we put that into a capital replacement fund, set it aside until those big needs are met. An example would be in 2029, it's projected that we will have a large expenditure for rail car replacements. So we'll build up that capital replacement fund over the next several years and then spend it down as we replace vehicles or some of these other large expenditure needs. So we're trying to manage cash flows to those peaks and valleys that we experience. We also, along with the midterm financial plan, we have substantial reserves. You may recall, nothing, I wouldn't put it as excess reserves, but we have enough reserves that we can provide a catch up on our asset management. The backlog has decreased significantly, and we do feel we're in a pretty good place. Our bigger constraints aren't financial at this point. They're more based on people power and availability of contractors. So we feel we're in a fairly good place with our reserves, and especially with some of the economic discussions that have occurred. A lot of talk out there about a recession. Some would claim that we're already in a recession, have 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, and potentially could last through end of next year. So reserves in the past, we had kept those very, very small, basically spending most everything we had available, just try to get caught up on asset management as well as provide service. We've been able to build up those reserves through COVID. I think we're in a pretty good place. Obviously, it would be a shame if we had to spend that money on something it wasn't intended for, such as a drop in our sales and use tax brought on by a recession. But it does provide us that stability that we don't need to necessarily in the short term go looking for substantial cuts in our expenditures. Some of the considerations, we already talked a little bit about flexing the strategic priorities and being able to be scalable with certain expenditures. And so we do have that ability within this budget, we believe too. So I will get to a discussion here in the cash flows, and we'll focus in on some of the areas that we have potentially some areas to move, but we also have reserves. So what we've seen, to put that in context, what we've seen in the last couple of years and prior, we've actually been under budget on our expenditures, most notably in the operating expenses. There's a variety of reasons for that. One being that we, according to statutory requirements, in order to move forward with a procurement, we have to have the funding available for the full procurement in place in order to issue a purchase requisition. So that's one constraint that prevents us from being dead onto our budget, which would be next to impossible anyway. However, we do have some amounts in our budget that we've come under budget, typically around $70 to $80 million per year. And so one of our strategic metrics is to actually bring that variance down so we can budget a little more accurately, and that will be reflected in our midterm financial plan. Give us a little more certainty as to what funding is really available and not have that excess standing out there. I think that'll help accomplish a lot in terms of focusing our efforts on what we're really going to execute on and not have additional funding there, and still help retain that ability to come back to the board when unplanned items come up or there's additional needs that need to be considered. Economic volatility, still a big concern, a lot going on, obviously with inflation, supply chain issues. I'd also throw in that category the employment rate and the labor market, particularly here in the Denver metro area. We all know that there's significant constraints. We've been experiencing that, particularly in certain areas with operators and mechanics for many, many years, but it's just been exacerbated under the current situation, and it's extended throughout our entire workforce. There were discussions earlier about having the people power to do new initiatives. We have many individuals that are wearing more than one hat, as was mentioned, and we have a lot of vacancies. But I would point out that we have budgeted to fill those vacancies. So the funding is available, the intent is there. It's just actually making that happen. A strong financial position gives us that flexibility to be agile, to be scalable. I think in the past, in my perspective, I think when we did have good years, we maybe got a little ahead of ourselves in certain terms of expending money without a big focus on longer term sustainability. I think we're in a much better place now where we're really focused on sustainability, a strategic plan, maintaining the assets that we do have, and keeping those reserves in a position that they're available when we need to use them, which will help avoid things like financing purchase of vehicles, which costs us more money because of the interest factor. We plan to cash fund all these large cash expenditures, and based on our projections, we believe that's doable. Additional budget modifications remain. So with this draft budget, there were ongoing discussions, some outstanding items. We're still making a few small adjustments, getting things all in the right buckets for board approval. Nothing substantial there. And again, with an eye towards our midterm financial plan target, staying within that range that the board approved. So to sum it all up, what you'll see is we have $783.2 million in operating expenses. We'll have a comparison later that shows how that compares to 2022. $26.8 million in new capital, which is a total of $810 million. One of the items that we will bring that's not in this budget is a carry forward reconciliation. The carry forward on the expense side is essentially projects that were started or not started that were budgeted in this year. We don't need to budget for them again next year in 2023. We actually just take that budget appropriation and ask the board to go ahead and reappropriate that. But we also reconcile it and make sure that unneeded funds or projects that are no longer necessary that were budgeted for 2022 are not carried forward. This graph, we wanted to throw this in here just to kind of show where we've been versus what we anticipate for 2023. So the blue portions of those bars represent the COVID relief grant funding. So somewhere around 780 million, I think it was 783 million in total, really helped us out during 2020 through 2022. We've drawn those funds down. I know that in the midterm financial plan, we indicated that we anticipate drawing those down over an extended period of time. But we do anticipate drawing the majority, virtually all of that money down by the end of this year, which is great at this point in time because with interest rates being higher in our short durations, we're not really affected a whole lot by movements in interest rates, but it does give us the opportunity to actually get some yield on our investments. We anticipate going from basically $0 in investment income up to $20 million plus, maybe a little higher in 2023. So actually good timing to pull that money in quickly, get it invested and start yielding some money, some returns for our needs, RTD's needs. Moving on to a pie chart showing our expenditures. This is really just a breakdown by category. And the intent of this graphic is really to impress upon everybody that salaries and benefits still make up the majority of our costs. We have budgeted, as I mentioned, for vacancies. We have budgeted for positions both on the represented side and the non-represented side, particularly make sure that we meet our standard, our system optimization plan. It includes funding for all of our frontline workers as well as the support staff. A very large expenditure there. Purchase transportation, a large majority of that also goes to pay contractors, employees as well. That makes up 27% of the budget. Those are the two largest slices of the pie. We do have here at RTD, we do have a tendency to contract a lot of our services. So in the services pie slice, the orange slice there, 15% actually goes. We found that it's actually much more efficient for us, and both on a financial basis and a performance basis, to contract many of our services where we may not have that expertise in-house. So rather than hiring somebody full-time for a project, we'll contract that service out or try to go out and get specific expertise that we really need for, say, an IT project. So it's a fairly large expenditure, but that too is scalable depending on what the needs are of the organization in alignment with our strategic plan. So here is a pictorial of a comparison showing our current budget for this year versus what is in this requested budget at this point. As I mentioned, we'll have some adjustments to the total operating expenses on line 14 and bring that down closer to the $750, $760 million range in alignment with our midterm financial plan. Those are all, nothing's necessarily being cut. It's just when we put these requests together, there's certain items that we discuss, and as you add those up and determine, we're probably not going to be able to execute on some of those initiatives or some of those expenditures just because of our people power problem, et cetera. And we really want to bring down that budget variance in 2023 to what we can actually deliver on. So with that in mind, you can see, I'll just go through a few of these items on line 1, which is indicated in the blue on the left. Line 1 fares, by bringing those down more to what our trend is, we anticipate collecting more in the range of $89.5 million as opposed to the budget of $98 million this current year. Fares only make up 8 to 10% of our operating expenses. So it's not a significant amount anymore. Still, a good chunk of money that we wouldn't want to lose all those fares, or we'd have to make adjustments to our expenses. However, we do want to reflect what we think reality is. Sales and use taxes are our largest revenue source, is right in line with what CU Leads provided to us for the median, not the optimistic or the pessimistic, the median forecast. And then line 3, I'd point out that grant revenue. So what was reflected in there is really our operating grants, as well as some miscellaneous smaller income, but the primary number there of $157.7 million is our preventive maintenance grants. That's all based on our NTD funding, or our NTD reporting, and that funding comes from the Federal Transit Administration through Section 5307 preventive maintenance grants. In past years, well, the most recent year, that was approximately $92 million in 2022. With the IIJA and the bipartisan infrastructure law, that two combined were one initiative, which increased funding. A portion of that was for transit. The biggest piece that RTD qualifies for in that apportionment is an approximate $30 million increase in our preventive maintenance grants, which is substantial. It's close to a 30% increase in our annual apportionment. So that's super, super helpful, especially with the one-time funding going away. The BIL, the bill put that in place, approximately $30 million additional in 2023. That stays there and increases by an inflationary factor all the way through 2026. So that's recurring funding. All indications is that will not be taken away when 2026 comes and goes, that it would cause too much pain probably for the transit agencies. So at least we projected that funding level would continue. So significant help on that end. Moving into expenses, row 6, just a few items that's detailed out in the budget document, but a couple of things I'd like to point out is the reason for that increase is partially due to the collective bargaining agreement that was put in place. I think the board is well aware of the provisions within that and the changes that took place. We have budgeted for that. We also have additional monies in there, mainly on the benefit side. And what we've tried to do under General Manager Johnson's leadership is really, there was an employee survey put out for benefits on the non-represented side, got a lot of feedback. We've made some adjustments, made it a much more appealing offering in terms of the health and welfare benefits. Not a substantial increase, but something that is really in line with our desire as an agency, along with the CBA, to improve the appeal to employees, as well as working conditions and just the general overall employee environment. We do have a decrease in materials and supplies. I would point out within that category, that does include fuel. So within that category, you don't see it, but there is an increase included in there for fuel. We've locked in our diesel fuel, which is we use approximately 7 million gallons per year. locked that in at a price of $3.20 per gallon. In 2022, that was $2.30 per gallon, so a 90-cent increase, which we all feel is relatively good, gives us budget certainty with all the volatility in the fuel markets, and not a significant increase in terms of the overall budget. That is offset by decreases due to supply chain issues, as well as some of our parts needs, et cetera. We're really going through putting a focus on our inventory that we have, really ratcheting things down and really taking a look through an asset information maturity program to really look at what the needs are so that we don't overbuy, that we don't, not that we have been necessarily, but we don't overbuy, we don't maybe do preventive maintenance earlier than necessary. So we've really tried to tighten that up. I would point out outside services, you'll see a large decrease there, and a portion of that is shifting up into row 6, salaries and benefits. What's happening generally is the security contract that we have to provide security services. The intent going into 2023 is to reduce security services. Some of that is based on people power from them too, and we're experiencing actually lower costs than was budgeted in 2022. But we would shift that cost from contracted security services up to actually having RTD employed police officers. So it's really kind of an offset, but it's a noticeable change in those two line items. Purchase transportation, row 13. Just wanted to point out that increase there reflects the amendments. We had planned for this. We knew there would be some increases coming as a result of the CBA increases. So what drove that really is we had significant increases in our wages. Our contractors on fixed route need to be competitive for their employees as well. So they need to be somewhat in line with what we're offering in the marketplace. So those reflect those increases, a $6.9 million increase. Finally, the last item I'd like to point out here is on row 15, debt service. So you see that $9 million decrease. That's due to the most recent refinancing. So we're actually recognizing those savings. And so that's all money that we're not going to spend next year and beyond. And it does scale up and down depending on the year, $9 to $12 million additional savings. And that was reflected in the midterm financial plan. I said that was the last item, but what I'd like to say is on row 19, it shows a negative cash flow of $113 million. So we talk a lot about a balanced budget. Revenue should equal expenses, but the other part of that equation is reserves or money that we already have. Some of that expenditure, that negative costs, all that negative costs really covered by funding that we have from previous years that will be carried forward to cover that. It's just not reflected here because we don't show it as revenue. Next year we show it's really in our bank. And so that will pay for that. So essentially we're comfortable with where we are with this budget. It really is a balanced budget when you take our savings or our reserves into account. And so I think I'll leave off of that, Mr. Chair, and be happy to take any questions. What I would offer up too is that finance, myself, my staff, the whole team is available to answer any questions. We'd love the opportunity if you want to see more detail to go through it in more detail. We also offer that up to the public. Want to be transparent and share the information. We love talking about finance. So if anybody were to have questions after this or want to go into more detail, we'd be happy to sit down with you or take the time to go through it. So that concludes my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Really appreciate it. And thank you for highlighting all of the changes and differences from last year. Also, thank you for the comment early on about budgeting and how we've historically kind of, what do we have available and how do we divvy it as opposed to what are we trying to accomplish and how do we budget for that? Appreciate that comment. It's an important and significant change. Also, thank you for the stability that you and your team are bringing here. This has been a really hard couple of years, and the way that the shape that we were in going into COVID was, took us to the edge. So I know as you said, we're fortunate for the relief funding, but in addition to being fortunate to having that as well managed, that we're coming out in a stronger position than we started. So thank you very much for taking the time to go through this in detail, for sending this out. and most importantly, for the stability that you've been leading us towards. So I'll go ahead and open the floor to questions and comments from directors. Director Cook, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Doug, for all the work that went into this. Really, it shows, presentation was an excellent one. Chief Fitzgerald, in meeting with people, is talking about ramping up his workforce considerably with post-certified officers. Does the budget reflect that, and how many officers are we talking about there?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I'd like to also mention it's the team, the finance team, putting the budget together, and they've done a ton of work. So I really want to give a shout out to them. So thank you for that. And yes, that is the Chief of Police attention, Chief Fitzgerald. He does have included in there 40 new positions for officers, offset by a decrease in the contracted services. Part of the certification process and alignment with the direction that we're taking in terms of our security also involves not just the wages and benefits, also requiring space planning, equipment planning. All those items are really considered in this budget as well. So there's a lot that goes into that. There's vehicles, a lot that goes in that the chief has really considered, and he's putting together a very detailed plan on that.
Okay. And then for salaries and benefits for non-represented employees, does that 10% reflect in part a COLA that we have given or are planning to give?
Yes, and what we typically do in our budgets until a decision has been made on items like that, as well as other items, parts, et cetera, is we put an inflationary factor in there. So no decision has been made. So we put a placeholder in there of the inflation rate of 3% on those wages. So that's yet to be determined what that actually looks like. And in past years, that too is scalable depending on the needs. Obviously, we have a lot of external pressures in terms of market competitiveness, et cetera. So I think that'll be a larger discussion with General Manager Johnson and the direction that we take with that. But we do have a relatively small placeholder in here. What I would offer up to is the non-represented employees make up approximately a third of the RTD's employee staff. So those increases are relatively small. So whether it's 3%, 1%, 5%, it's something that we can absorb.
Okay. And then just one last, I happen to have, for some reason, an asset management plan that was prepared according to the footnote on February 28, 2020. Well, right on the edge of the precipice, so what it showed was for 2023, it showed asset maintenance of, or capital asset requirements of only, I can't even see if they're not thousands. It looks like it's a mere 3 million. Whereas in 2021, we had 98 million, 2022, we had 39 million. What happened? I mean, how different did our actual expenditures, how different were they? And is the difference between what you're showing on that chart of capital asset in the asset maintenance plan, is that restoring? I mean, I'm trying to get a sense for what we have done and how fully we've funded it. You said we've fully funded it.
Yes, and that's a very important point of this. The whole financial projections is our capital maintenance needs, asset management needs. There's really two main factors that affected that. Since 2020, you may recall when the board approved the midterm financial plan, at one point, the board only wanted to approve 2 years because there was so much uncertainty. That midterm financial plan that was presented only showed that we had enough funding to provide for 70% of the projects, or 70% of the capital maintenance needs that were needed, asset management. What's changed is two things, essentially. Number one, we've gotten additional clarity on those capital needs as we've continued to refine things. So I would put that in context by saying we had a lot of large projects that were just nearing or had just finished completion, large infrastructure projects. We've got additional clarity in terms of the components that make that up. So when we put together the asset management plan, I'll use a simple example that The steel rails deteriorate at a different rate than the concrete and the ballast that's within that entire project. So as we've really tried to nail that down and get a little bit more information in addition to our actual experience with maintaining those, that all goes into the calculation of, when do we need the money, how much do we need, and where do we need it? It's a very complicated process, as you can imagine, with $8 billion in assets. So we've gotten additional clarity on there. We've made some progress on clearing some of the backlog. And I would say COVID has been, to a certain extent, it's been relatively good from a financial perspective by resetting our expectations in terms of expenditures, service levels and operating costs. Some of the asset management needs have been revised to say, as we align with the strategic plan, there's certain things that have fallen out and aren't necessarily as important. So we'll continue to get additional clarity moving forward, and also aligning things more so with the strategic plan. So I do anticipate there will be additional changes going forward. It could be by year, it could be by amount. But yeah, it was a big nut that was out there that we really need to address at that time, and it's come down quite a bit, just based on that clarity as well as some of the needs going forward.
Okay, thanks so much. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Cook. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Other questions from directors, other discussion items? Yes, Director Broom, please.
I just got to jump on other matters, so I'll hold still.
Oh, okay. All right. Director Deschel, please.
Yeah, and Doug, I apologize if I missed this during your presentation, but and maybe this is more a board fiscal policy question, but as we look at the possibility of de-Brucing, and we're sort of in a position this year where we may be able to make bigger contribution to reserves in the event that we don't de-Bruce, how are we, I know it was in the midterm financial plan, but as I look at an increase from 3 to 3.4 months of reserves, that doesn't quite seem to cover the amount of loss that we would experience as early as 24 or 25. Can you help me understand maybe why we're not putting more in reserves to prepare for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we did have some initial discussions. There was an ad hoc committee set up to look at the Tabor issue. We tabled that until January, and we'll pick that back up, collected a lot of good information in terms of the reserves and its application to the impact from revenue limitations under Tabor. One of the challenges that we have is because of that ratchet down effect, it basically resets. If we go through a session after we're no longer de-Bruced, we go through a session and it drops our sales and use tax level. That's a new basis, as you know, for calculating increases beyond that, based on property tax increases and inflation within the metro district. So we'd be limited to that growth. So if we saved up reserves, it could get us over that hump of the drop, but it doesn't solve the problem of not getting back up to what the actual growth rate is. So say it's 10%.
Yeah.
So I think I think probably what we've talked about a little bit through that ad hoc process is maybe more of a long-term solution. And one of the things that was kicked around, there are many suggestions potentially kicked around, none of them great, but some options. But one of the things that we talked about, particularly with this looming recession and inflation, it has the potential to bring down our sales and use taxes to a lower level right at the worst time, because the Tabor impact will be based on 2024 sales and use tax collections and take effect in 2025. So it may ratchet us down right before we get limited on our revenue. So one potential option we have is refinancing just one of the bonds and extending that to 2026, so we can get the recovery potentially coming out of a recession, get back up to a higher level and start at least at that basis. So those are kind of the things we're looking at. I think, the reserve issue fixes the drop. It doesn't necessarily address the ongoing challenge of limited growth.
It's a Band-Aid. Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Deschel. It's a good question. Bad timing. Again, thank you for the stability going into that to the finance team. Other questions for Mr. McLeod or his team? I had one, I guess just two more, one's more a point to make, but Doug, there probably was not really time, given the prior discussion that we had about partnerships. One of the things that's on my mind about how that scales, if we start talking about percentage of budget, for example, is the indirect cost rate and understanding. I mean, here, we're talking about needing to hire for that position and get an idea of, what all the costs, direct and indirect, would be of administering additional grants and additional partnership. Just curious, did the team get a chance to get into any of that at all? I know it's a fairly new program, but any discussion around the partnership program and modeling that into the budget, or is it just kind of a simple estimate at this point, given the newness of it?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And it was a very simple discussion at this point to have a placeholder in there of $2 million based on the $400,000 or $500,000 projects. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it applies to many of our expenses. That it goes back to this discussion about being agile with our budgets, that while the board appropriates the money, it's locked down, and we have internal controls to make sure it gets spent for what was appropriated and agreed to by the board. We do have the flexibility, and what we see in the past is a budget is an estimate at this point in time. And 2 months later, we get into the board, hopefully will approve the requested budget in early November. 2 months later, we'll get into the actual year. And as you get further into the year, the more differences you have the budget, and they're always under budget because we have the controls in place. You can't go over budget, so you spend within your budget, but a lot of things don't get started, or maybe there's delays in hiring positions. So we often have positive variances, which gives us that flexibility. We also have the agility to reprioritize something that may have been a project, for instance, that may have been a high priority in October, November of 2022. In June of 2023 may not be feasible, may not go forward, and that provides additional funding to maybe consider something else. Of course, that would go through the board for approval to relocate that money too. But I think to your point of that question is really, we do have some ability to move within that budget going through the approval process, that I do think we have that flexibility, where in past years we were so tight on money, it didn't give us a lot of room for movement.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for making that point and going through that. That flexibility is good to have. And I guess that leads into my second question, which is it fair to, we talked about this a little bit, is it fair to expect that our highest risk in terms of budget variance at this point continues to be people power problem, that, if we don't fill these vacant positions, given the substantial portion of our expenditures that we may have a substantial underspend again?
Yes, and I probably should have put more emphasis on that. And it has a cascading effect, as you can imagine. So if you don't have the person there, they can't necessarily deliver projects and execute on things that cascade down to other costs, external services, where we need a project manager to manage a contractor, we need somebody to order parts, et cetera. So yeah, it definitely is our biggest concern in terms of budget variances, I think, at this point.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. Something to watch. Hard to control, but thank you very much. Appreciate that. Look forward to seeing the final budget, and I know working on the carry forward, so it'll be interesting to see where that comes out. I know, and thank you for bringing this to us as a discussion item. Without any further hands going up, we'll go ahead and conclude that. Again, thank you very much to the team, and Doug, really thanks for going in deep on this, and also for the format of the budget that's provided. I meant to mention that it's great, the way the narrative is structured, the detail. It's really awesome. Thank you. All right, we're going to move into other matters. And Director Broom, you jumped the gun before, so I'll go ahead and make sure to give it to you first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The one thing that I've missed in this whole budget discussion that we would normally see by now is new data from the 2020 census about what's going on within our district, so that we can properly plan for, the transportation needs. And so I'm not sure why it's taking so long for those numbers to come out, but I wonder if we should team up with Dr. Cog and with CDOT because to see if we can't get a consultant on board to pull together all these various numbers that we all need to do long-term planning.
Thank you for making that comment, Director Broom. I'm going to take a note on that as a planning item. I don't know if Mr. McLeod, if you have any comments you want to offer on that. I know, unfortunately, we'll work on changing the timing of this meeting in future years. I know we're on top of the Aptitrans Pro. So I don't know if Ms. Johnson has anything she wants to chime in at this point, but I'm also happy to take that if you're okay with this, Director Broom, as a follow-up item for us to follow up on. But Ms. Johnson, go ahead if you'd like to comment.
Yes, no, I think that is great, and excuse the noise. As you indicated, I'm at the Aptitrans Forum. But yes, we can explore that going forward as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Johnson. Yeah, thank you for raising it, Director Broom.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I had one very quick other matter, and I will be bringing this up again, especially as we go into the new year. But this is the second to last finance meeting of the year, which is hard to believe. But this is more just for my board colleagues to start thinking about. Something I've been really reflecting on has been, as we're coming out of, going into our audit process, we had our risk assessment. And one item that didn't make it to the top list was our dependence on sales and use tax. And it didn't make it into the top list largely because of the factor of its likelihood or probability to happen. What's interesting about that is both staff and board rated it fairly highly as having an impact to the agency. And the board actually had it as its highest. And the likelihood of that, what strikes me, has increased when we rate the likelihood of risk based on what we just most recently saw at our last meeting from CU Leads about where our sales and use tax are going. And so that dependency on sales and use tax, and especially as we think about impacts from Tabor and so forth, is a risk to the agency and our ability to operate once we do start to return workforce. So I took some time in kind of opening the door to work with other directors here to really start looking more closely at other budgets of other transit agencies, not just locally in the United States, but also globally. And some things really dawned on me. I know a number of directors have talked about the concept of diversifying our funds and diversifying revenue sources. And I think that's something that we need to work together as a board to start a regional conversation on. We do have as we just were reviewing with this budget, a 75 to 80% of our revenue and proceeds dependent upon sales tax. And, I think given that we're in this new normal, fare revenues, and here we're looking at fare simplification and reduction, are going to remain low. And when we look across the country, it's easy just to pick out examples. TriMet may not be the best one because they don't collect sales tax, but they do have a payroll tax component. The MBTA in Boston has 16% of their budget comes from local and state assessments. And that's something that comes to my mind as we talk about these partnership programs and almost looking at those as a pilot. And one of the reasons I'm very curious about what the contribution is from those local partners. I think given our credibility as an agency and given what Fast Tracks has led us to, we certainly have to look to those partners and local and state. And, again, when we look at Philadelphia as a system I'm a lot more familiar with, having a lot of family in the area and being used to the system, again, substantial state and local funding going into that. The same thing is true, you name it. SB 21260 passed last year represented a huge opportunity. In my mind, one of the other reasons we need to diversify funding is it's increasingly dawning on me that sales tax does not necessarily scale the way it needs to for our area. We have 2,300 square miles. We like to talk about that. What that means is we have these huge swaths of area that don't actually have revenue generating assets in terms of sales or even land or even property for that matter. And so things that we can look at, SB 21260, I think contemplated this fairly well with vehicle miles traveled and fees on other services. And I know that we have political challenges in terms of our ability to work with the state on you know, I would say making transit a priority over just strictly road improvements. But I do think that as we head into next year, that's something I look across this group here, and I'm appreciative of all of you. I think we have creative minds. I think we have folks who have the energy to do this. I think we have folks who, you know, are interested and able to reach out to other elected officials to start this discussion. But we are extremely dependent on a tax that does not scale for our service area properly, and also exposes us to the type of risk that we're looking at from CU leads next year, as Mr. McLeod pointed out, right as we head into the Tabor ratchet down effect. So if anyone has any comments on that, I certainly welcome them, but also just throwing it out there as something I'd like for this board to start talking about and working on next year. Director Geisinger, go ahead, please.
Thanks. You know, I totally agree with you. And looking at it recently when the question has come up some, I think that diversifying our funding is critical. And obviously the CDOT 10-year plan, they've just changed to really focus on transit and multimodal improvements rather than roads. So I do think that we need to be looking at it. And I think as we plan our budget and our partnerships and everything else, we need to have a real serious focus on building the relationships that we need for moving forward in that way. So I agree with you. Let's discuss it.
Thanks, Director Geisinger. Appreciate it. Yeah, not something for us to solve now at 8:55, but you know, I think next year is a good thing to be taking on both in finance and across the board at large. So thank you for allowing me to take the time on that. Are there any other matters from other board members? All right. Well, with that, the next meeting of this committee will be Tuesday, November 1st. It will be a different timing. So it's November 1st as opposed to the second Tuesday. So we'll see you then for the last Finance Committee meeting of the year. Seeing no further discussion, thank you very, very much to all of you for the patience, the collaboration, both on staff and the board. We will adjourn at 8:56 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you.
Good job, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Have fun.